We will start our regular board meeting February 24th, 2014 being held at Fields School. Terry?
Yep.
Would you please do the roll?
Okay, I'll call him last. Dathan Paterno? Here. Scott Zimmerman?
Here.
Tony Borelli?
Here.
John Heidi? Here. Vicki Lee?
Here.
Terry Cameron? Here. And Dan Collins?
Here. We looked forward to having a full and robust meeting tonight, at the conclusion of which we have the pleasure of going to a closed session under 5 Illinois Compiled Statutes 122C2, deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees, as well as the placement of individual students in special education programs and other matters relating to individual students under 5 Illinois Compiled Statutes 122C10. That being said, we have a program tonight by the members of Fields School and presented by our principal, Ms. Walsh. It's for lower back patients. Yeah, right.
Sit on. There we go. Again, thank you, Dr.
You're
Ferrari.
very welcome.
We start out by welcoming Field Cub Scout Pack number 1. I'd like to thank the boys tonight for their citizenship and leadership with the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm told they are the oldest pack in Park Ridge, the longest standing pack, so there's a little bit of history there. I now welcome Mrs. Margie Figgins, PTO President of Fields School.
I'm a lot shorter than Mrs. Walsh. Good evening, everyone. I am Margie Figgins, the PTO president here at Fields School. We are very fortunate to have hundreds of parent volunteers working hard to provide a strong sense of community, as well as many activities for the students of Fields School. In October, we had one of our 3 major fundraisers, our Fall Fest, and we've also already had our student show this school year. Next month, we will have close to 100 parents performing in our 60th annual V-Show, which is our 2nd major fundraiser. And we look forward to our 3rd major fundraiser, the Walkathon in the spring. There are many other events and activities and clubs here at Fields School, but there are too many to name, and I don't want to forget anyone. We are lucky to have the funds to provide many fun and educational opportunities for our students. And we are very fortunate to be at a school where parent volunteers work with the wonderful staff to make Field School a great place to learn.
Okay, well, tonight I will be giving you a little glimpse of what it's like to be a student at Field School. So rather than doing a day in the life, we're going to do a month in the life and quickly highlight a few things from February. We kicked off February with incredible participation in the District Science Olympiad. Not only did we have several medalists as Field School, but even more exciting, we had 114 participants, which was 40% of the total participants across the district. This is a real testimony to the level of parental involvement we have at Field. It is through their volunteerism and the way they supported their students as they practiced and participated that truly made the difference. Other February events included Valentine's Day parties, a PTO-sponsored storyteller, and a fun-filled Saturday with the Winter Carnival. Students dedicated their free time at lunch to participate in activities such as Battle of the Books, Chess Club, Team Cares, Science Club, and Junior Great Books. And before and after school, they participate in safety patrols, chorus, folly script writing, volleyball, Lego Club, and math club. We had a school-wide Spirit Week to reinforce Field School behavioral expectations. Our instrumental music students performed at the annual Progress concerts at Emerson, and their hard work shone through their wonderful performances. The Field School Student Council facilitated a secret Cupid, assuring all students would receive a special Valentine, personalized with an observed quality of greatness of each student, which is this year's school theme. We had amazing learning experiences in our classrooms. Artists in our school designed, cut, loomed, printed to create heart-inspired masterpieces. Fourth graders used Google Hangout to reach out across the country to learn about different regions across the United States. They discussed different nearby landforms, industries, and asked fourth graders, where would you go on a field trip in your neck of the woods? The third graders went on an amazing field trip to Mitchell Museum of Native American, enriching their learning of several tribes. With new knowledge in hand, they participated in the annual Native American Day. Students rotated through 5 classrooms to focus on different aspects of Native American culture. Field second graders have started learning about oceans. They've had the chance to video chat with marine biologists in Florida and look forward to a webinar. First graders explored the magical number of 100 with special math activities celebrating 100 Day. Spanish students also celebrated 100 Day by singing Cero hasta 100, or 0 to 100. There was PE excitement in both of our gyms. Our North Gym hosted inline skating for intermediate students, and our K-2 students enjoyed amazing feats at Olympic-inspired stations. In our South Gym, students enjoyed an amazing maze of gymnastics. Fifth grade had the opportunity to reach out to Sochi through Skype and be inspired through a conversation with gold medalist Joey Cheek. Clearly, I could go on and on. With the final thought of February, I will leave you with a clip from the 5th grade vocabulary parade. This event broadened students' academic language and allowed students' creativity to shine. And I stress that it's truly the hallmark of Field School, combining the academics with the creativity. So on behalf of the supported families, the amazing staff, and the phenomenal children of Red Oak, I welcome the Board of Education this evening, and thank you for the opportunity to share a month in the life at Field School. Welcome.
Thank you. It's always nice to hear the activities that go on in our community member schools. And we will proceed right into public comments. Again, if anyone has comments to make on items that are not currently action items on the agenda, please come forward to the podium, state your name. I assume that there will be comments for the action items then. Oh, we have one.
Hi. I didn't see full-day kindergarten on the agenda, but I apologize if I missed it. I am very excited to see the news of the survey that was released today, that we are doing a survey of interest in full-day kindergarten. My name is Jennifer Rubin, and I have 2 kids at Roosevelt, one currently a kindergartner and another child who will enter kindergarten in 2016. I feel it's very important for our school district to offer full-day kindergarten. Most other surrounding area school districts are starting to move towards a full-day kindergarten program, and I think it's important that we remain competitive with those areas, school districts around us. With regards to the news, I have a couple specific questions. I was wondering what level of participation in the survey and corresponding interest is needed to move forward with considering a full-day program? Is that something you can answer?
Let me answer. I can answer some of your questions just to kind of, and it's a good venue to clarify some of the issues that have come up before. When I first came to District 64, the superintendent profile that was issued did not indicate that all-day kindergarten was of a huge importance to the community. Understand the district I came from, I instituted all-day kindergarten. So for those who feel like I've not been supportive of it, I certainly am. I did it. I have the proof of it. What we're looking for here is what the interest is. We want to make sure that before this district goes on and does, for example, the next step would be to look at an educational adequacy study to see if our facilities, as they are, can be reworked, rearranged at minimal cost to provide this service. That would be the next step. That comes at an expense. The district has to take a look at that. In the event that all-day kindergarten would be something that's more viable, then the board would have to tangle down the road who foots the cost. You know, whether it would be the district, whether it would be the parents. The survey also is certainly open, as you will see, for all community members, because if the expense comes back onto the entire community, the community at large would have to have a role in saying how this comes out. So I can't speak on behalf of the board what certain numbers would be. I think that Dr. Borelli would agree that we certainly want to take a look at the data that comes in. That data will be presented at the next board meeting in March. We'll give all the information at that time. That'll be an informational only piece, and that will be at the point in time when the board has to start thinking about where we go as far as next steps.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate your continued attention.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on items that are currently not on the agenda? Not seeing any hands, let's move on to our first agenda item. Approval of the outdoor education program recommendations. Dr. Hinton?
Well, first of all, thank you again for the opportunity tonight to talk with the board about this topic. And I actually have 3 representatives from the administrative team who are here and are available to answer further questions about the report that we prepared for the board. So Andy Petroline is the assistant principal at Washington. Dan Walsh is the principal at Franklin. And Kevin Dwyer is the principal at Roosevelt. As you know, we've discussed this topic for the past 2 board meetings. On February 10th, the board requested that administration really look at possible options regarding the concerns for reducing sort of the issues related to supervision and safety. The board also requested that we analyze these options to determine their impact, and then outline the feasibility of the options. What are the pros and cons of all of these possibilities? The board also recommended that we seek additional feedback from our former parent chaperones to see if we could brainstorm sort of something out of the box to begin to alleviate some of these concerns. The administrative team got together and brainstormed 7 possible options for addressing our concerns. And when you look at the options, you can see that the first 5 options really seek to alleviate our concerns by changing the components of the current program. And options 6 and 7 seek to alleviate our concerns by increasing the responsibility of other parties that could be involved. The options are certainly not mutually exclusive. It might be that we decide that a combination of options would actually improve the situation for us. Just to begin, I want to start by thanking all of the parent chaperones who contributed to the survey. People really put a lot of thought into their answers, and I appreciate the whole administrative team appreciates the time and effort that went into participating in the survey. Generally, some themes that came from the parent chaperone survey are that our parent chaperones, as we noted probably last week, don't share the same level of concern that we have about supervision and safety and privacy. But generally, when we look at the themes from the survey, we see that our parent chaperones do support increasing student safety and reducing risk by taking a number of actions. And our parent chaperones recommended possibly increasing the number of chaperones, providing more extensive chaperone training, improving the screening of chaperones, modifying our current participation and consent documents, extending certified staff supervision, or even possibly the camp activities until later in the evening so that we reduce some of the unstructured time that students have, and creating behavior incentives for students to be able to participate in the overnight component of the Camp Duncan program. And I also want to note that our chaperones also had lots of ideas about other things that potentially contribute to safety, but were just generally great ideas. So, for example, providing students with water in their cabins overnight, or providing bus service for students who would prefer to come home, or involving the social worker to a greater extent in Camp Duncan. So again, we want to thank our parent chaperones for contributing to the discussion. I just thought I could go quickly through our options so that people would have an understanding of what they look like. And that first option is really to recruit District 64 certified staff to supervise students overnight. And we had talked about this at a couple of board meetings, and our administrative team was able to be in contact with PREA, and PREA has shared with us that after consulting with IEA's legal counsel, they've been advised that supervising the overnight component would not be possible. And while this is unfortunate, I think it's also in some ways understandable. The PREA and IEA are concerned really about the liability that they believe would be assumed by certified staff members under those circumstances. So as an administrative team, we put our heads together and we thought, well, what if we created a team of certified substitute teachers who could assist with overnight supervision? And we met with Mr. Martin and sort of ran some figures, and we estimate that would add a significant cost to the participation fee for Camp Duncan. We're concerned about how that would impact student participation. And then second, there are just some pieces related to the substitute piece that make us a little bit uncomfortable. While many of our substitutes know many of our students well, we're not sure we can rely on a substitute team from year to year in terms of consistency. And we know that there are times in the district where we have different activities going on related to professional development or to other events, and it's challenging to secure substitutes. And we're concerned about adding another variable, like having substitutes attend a camp experience, sort of pulling from that pool. We talked a little bit about the possibility of creating sort of a Camp Duncan overnight supervision SWAT team, so a team of people who would sort of be employed for that specific purpose. We didn't have enough time to explore that particular recommendation in detail, just in terms of looking at feasibility of cost, and possibly even going so far as to post the position and see what a qualified candidate pool would look like. The second option was recruiting additional parent chaperones to supervise the overnight component. Certainly one of the concerns that we have as an administrative team in some ways is the unfair position that we're putting our parent chaperones in by asking them to take on this responsibility. Not everyone has the background or experience that's really required to be able to effectively supervise a large group of students, especially in an overnight setting. And we see that in terms of some of the inconsistency that happens through supervision. We also would note that individual schools have a difficult time sometimes recruiting the minimum number of parent chaperones that are required to supervise at camp. And it's possible that it might be difficult to sort of recruit additional parent chaperones. We also talked about providing additional training for parent chaperones. And this was something that came through very clearly in the parent chaperone survey. We contacted Camp Duncan in terms of brainstorming around training. And Camp Duncan said that they could sponsor some training for us that focuses on appropriate conduct, on child abuse, and on supervision. And these components are also part of our current training, but Camp Duncan does something a little bit different. They have their parent chaperones actually sign a training agreement. So it's a little bit of a more formalized process. While we don't find our District 64 training to be inadequate, we do see that it's not always consistently applied in every context. However, in our parent chaperone survey, parents said that they would like to see embedded in the training possibly more opportunities for role-playing, challenging interactions, or for responding to discipline incidents, or for figuring out how to settle students down at night. The fourth thing that we talked about as an administrative team was really recruiting additional nurse staff to support 2 shifts related to health. So we felt that having 2 shifts of health support would increase safety at camp by not requiring one nurse to supervise more than one day and one night. We did run the numbers on that, and we think that would increase the cost of camp at about $8 per student. We had talked at one point as a team about identifying a fully staffed outdoor education program. So we worked together to contact, we put a message out on the Illinois Principal Listserv, which is a listserv that serves all of the schools in Illinois. And then we put our heads together and contacted all of the camps that we thought were within a reasonable traveling distance of District 64. And what we found was that none of the camps actually have adult supervisors available on staff. The issue is that most camps maintain an extended staff over the summer, but are unable to do that, unfortunately, during the school year. We did contact the camp that we used to attend before we started attending Camp Duncan, and that camp is White Pines. And White Pines suggested that it might be possible for them to provide one adult supervisor per dormitory. One of the reasons, though, that we moved from White Pines was because it is a little bit farther than Camp Duncan. Actually, I believe it's twice as far as Camp Duncan. But we really have been pleased with the diversity of experience and the depth of learning that happens at Camp Duncan. Our administrative team has found that the quality of the program is better. So that was one thing that we considered when we looked at that. The sixth option, actually, we talked about, well, what if we could get sort of third-party sponsorship for the overnight component? We know that there are educational tour groups that sometimes structure experiences for students, and we do this, for example, with our Washington, D.C. trip at the middle school. So we contacted the three largest tour companies to see if it would be possible for this to happen. And unfortunately, they don't offer educational tours locally. And we asked them if they would be interested in partnering with us in this, and at this time, none of the three said that that would be a possibility. And then we started thinking about the Park District, because we partner with the Park District on so many things. And unfortunately, I learned just at the very, very end of last week that the Park District just respectfully declines this invitation. They just don't feel like this would be a fit for them right now in terms of the other programs that they have to offer. One thing that sort of evolved from our investigation over the past couple of weeks is this idea of modifying our current consent documents. As we began to have this conversation, we did, and I think we talked about this at our last board meeting, talk with the district's attorney about, what should our next steps be? Can you review our consent documents and talk with us a little bit about this? And our attorney had mentioned that we should contact our insurance company. And so between our insurance company and our attorney, certainly one of the recommendations that we minimally have would be to review and update all of our consent and participation documents, and also our current contract with Camp Duncan. So as we sort of looked at each of these 7 options, one of the things that we found was that they didn't really effectively alleviate our specific concerns. So we began to talk with Camp Duncan a little bit about what alternate plans might look like, just so we could frame that a little bit for the board if that was a conversation that we wanted to pursue. And we currently, in District 64, take our students on a 2.5-day sort of format for Camp Duncan. Our students participate in about 11 to 13 activities, and they do participate in an evening campfire and in hikes. One option that Camp Duncan provided us with was the possibility of one extended day, so maybe an early morning to a later in the evening experience. And that would be an approximate cost decrease of about $76, and our students would be able to experience 5 to 6 activities and still participate in an evening campfire and hikes. And then we also asked Camp Duncan what 2 extended days might look like. And they said the extended days would be a cost decrease of about $40. The days could be planned back to back or scheduled separately, so scheduled at different times of the year. And that would include about 10 to 12 activities, so it gets us up closer to the current format. And it would also continue to include those favorite activities that our students enjoy related to the evening campfire and to the hikes. Camp Duncan has a really extensive menu of activities. And we are aware from observation of what some of our students' favorites are. And we really feel confident that we won't have to sacrifice any of those favorite things in an extended day format. But Camp Duncan said they would continue, if we went with another option, they would continue to work with us to sort of flesh this out. In the event that we did that, we would also want to include some of our parent chaperones on that committee to help us get a solid idea of what this experience could look like for kids. So really, in summary, we didn't feel like any of the options, as I said, fully alleviated our concern. And our concern is really focused on the idea that we make this commitment to parents when we go to camp about the level of safety that we are providing for students in an overnight experience. And we're not comfortable that we can consistently provide that level of safety. And coupled with that is our thought that we can really design a dynamite outdoor education experience without the overnight component embedded in it. We recognize that it's a piece that students are very enthusiastic about, but we really feel that we can include many of their favorite activities in that extended day format. So I would, invite the board now to ask any questions or to continue the discussion.
Well, I'd like to be the first to thank the administrative team for the large amount of work that went into this report in such a very short time. At our last meeting, a lot of recommendations came forth. You obviously thought about them very clearly and put them down and did research into all of them, and it was very interesting and enlightening reading all of this. However, it did open up various avenues of questions, further questions. So I'll open it up to the board if there's any questions that would like to be directed. Well, I'd like to throw out one. I noticed that a parent in the community forwarded to the board some information of other school districts, and you saw that. It was passed on to you. Looking at those programs versus our programs, I find that there is a lot more time invested in training of the chaperones. You've already made a statement that you feel that that's by itself is not going to suffice. But how much input or how much overall effect would that really have toward improving the process?
We talked about that extensively as an administrative team because we if there was a way that we felt that we could maintain the overnight component and feel comfortable with it, that was our bias. We wanted to keep that for the kids. But the instances where we see that that we have challenges from a supervision perspective aren't overly complex incidences. They're examples of where people have either left students, and a very, very small minority of people have left students unsupervised or maybe haven't modeled the expectations that we have around civil behavior. So we don't feel like the training was not explicit related to those topics. It's very challenging to manage a large group of students if that's not sort of in your background or in your experience.
Are there any other questions or concerns on behalf of the board?
Lori, just a simple question, and pardon my ignorance, I have not had a child go to Camp Duncan yet, but you said it will reduce cost. Who bears the cost of it? I honestly don't know. I apologize.
Our parents bear the cost
So
of
they bear
Camp
it
Duncan.
entirely?
Yes.
Okay.
And I just mentioned the cost. People may or may not be interested in a reduction of cost. I just mentioned it as extra information that the team found
No, I
out.
appreciate it. I was just unaware of who paid it. Thank you.
Because this is an action item, if there's anybody in the audience who would like to make a statement prior to the board voting, please come up to the podium now.
Hi, my name is Roberta Gennaro, and I live here in Park Ridge. I don't have a child at Field School or at any of the schools right now. They're all grown. But I wanted to say my husband has a really good friend who owns a security company, and he may be able to provide security for the event. Somebody to be there overnight, maybe, again, cost, I don't know what it would be, but I know that he's in a school in Niles. I know he has some of his security men over there. So if you'd like, I could give you his information and you could talk to him. His name is Art Hannes, and he's the owner of American Heritage Security.
Thank you. Somebody over here? Yeah. Hi.
Hello. Hi. My name is Molly Dietlein. I'm a Roosevelt parent. I have two kids currently in District 64, a sixth grader at Lincoln, a fourth grader at Roosevelt, and a 4-year-old. So a future District 64. I was part of a team that put together a presentation that we forwarded to the board, that after our meeting on February 10th, we listened to the administrative team's feedback of their concerns. So we spent a couple hours in my kitchen and on the internet looking at what we saw as some viable solutions to some of the concerns. The two ones that were communicated to us were the safety of the children and the consistency of supervision. and also the medical privacy being an issue. So we responded in detail and, kind of spitballing some ideas. And they echo very similarly to what Lori had gone through. So ultimately, as a parent, I sit back and go, okay, in the last month, this has all happened, where I sat in my car at the Costco parking lot, got the survey, and went, what? We're looking at taking this away. Holy cow, wow, this is the first I've heard of it. Oh my gosh, that kind of got me excited. And then we met here today, and the board, I was very encouraged to hear that you guys were open to opportunities to discuss and collaborate. So that's where we certainly come from, is from a position of solutions that we could work really together as a team to say, maybe there are some things that we can overcome, because the reality is it's a risky world we live in. I absolutely don't negate the fact that there are risks inherent with raising kids, number one, on a daily basis, in my house, but from an administrative standpoint, and that is to be respected for sure. But, at our dinner table, we talk about risks and rewards, and we talk about how there are certain things that really aren't a concern of a 11-year-old or a 10-year-old, and those are liability and legal jargon. And those are the things that I hold important, that we shield our kids from those risks or even those conversations. So if we could be a team together and find those solutions that allow our kids to still be kids in a safe environment, I think we could really be mutually successful, really. So what I and my cohorts, Beth Barker and Chris Pertel, really implore the board is to give us more time. I think a month is way too little. And I think what Lori has presented and what we put together in our little presentation in a couple weeks really shows that, oh my gosh, in 2 weeks, look at what we found of examples of other districts that have put together spectacular training programs or opportunities to create a safe environment for our kids. Imagine what we can do in 8 months. Together, ultimately keeping the eye on the prize of giving our kids a spectacular overnight opportunity and experience for them to grow as kids and be in a, holy cow, risky environment. Because the world is full of risks, and we have to allow our kids to fall in a safe environment now. Because in a few years, they're going to be able to make decisions. And my inbox from Lincoln, my daughter can go to Wilmot and ski, sponsored by a PTO, but still part of the Lincoln organization. She's only 12. She got on a plane a couple weeks ago by herself. So these things are happening for our kids. And I think if we work together, I think we can find a solution that benefits all and keeps us protected, which is the ultimate goal. So thank you for your time. And I certainly hope that we get time, because that's what's most important for us, to get a true objective idea of what we can do to provide the continuation of a 20-year program that's rich in history and worth it. So I thank you again for your time. Thanks.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, I would invite the board members to make a motion on this topic.
Can I ask one question before we do that?
Of course.
So, Molly, you asked for sorry to yell there to you, Molly, but you asked for time. So, how much time would you like, ideally?
Well, ultimately, I was encouraged in the last meeting that board members had mentioned, oh my, sorry.
That's my fault. I was screaming at Molly.
Hi. So what we were encouraged with last time was the suggestion of continuing for next year as is, for lack of a better term, and meeting, whether we put together an advisory committee with parents and the administrative team before, obviously, February or end of January is the deadline for payment for Camp Duncan. So ultimately, you're looking at, in my opinion, what is a 12-month period, but we could certainly reduce that and have something in the next 6 months, whether we meet a couple, once a month, get some people that are interested to be on this committee. And we could viably, again, if we had 2 weeks, and this is what we've been able to put together, we could viably have a good solution where we hit all the true issues at hand. So, obviously, we're completely, we're flexible, and, but it sounds like we have a year. If we were to continue for next year on, that I would still agree with Lori at the end of her summary saying, if we continue as is, we certainly should revisit our training. We certainly should revisit our consent. There's very few things that I do without signing 6 pieces of paper to give liability issues clear, so that would be my
So I was on the phone
recommendation.
last board meeting, but I thought that is where we left this issue, and I was actually a little surprised that this came back with a motion to eliminate. So I'd just like to know how we got to that point.
Well, I can
'Cause I
clarify a little bit. I think Scott and I talked probably primarily about this issue. My thought was that if we had enough information and we had a recommendation in time this year, that I would be happy to vote on it. However, if the information couldn't be put together quickly enough to have a full conversation, my suggestion was that we kick it a year and continue the existing program for a year. So, I think it's open to board members to decide whether you think you've heard enough information since last meeting that you can make a permanent decision on the program, or whether you think that there should be additional conversation, in which case perhaps it makes sense to kick it a year. Scott, is that kind of your memory of how the conversation went?
I think that was how we left it, was that if they could come back with a thorough report, which obviously they hadn't, thank you very much for it, maybe, we could at least have the conversation or see if we wanted to vote. So I think that's how we left it.
Okay. Well, for one board member, this is probably one of the rare times that I respectfully disagree with administration on the recommendation. And, I think that there's nothing compelling to me on this report, or even from the last meeting, that would suggest that the issues could not be overcome with some time and effort that clearly parents and the community are willing to invest with administration. So.
That being said, I think that we've all have an opportunity now to voice our opinions. So if we can take a motion.
Well, Tony, if you can wait a little bit before you take a motion, because while I didn't have any questions of the administration in their report, I do have some comment, and I think it would make sense to, at least for some of us, to let our views be known to the other board members before we vote. I've given this quite a lot of thought, and I too, like Terry, ordinarily prefer to defer to administration on the sorts of details of running the school. I think we've got an excellent recommendation and set of information in front of us. In that, I think it's been very well researched. The administration put this together at the invitation of the board as we sensed that there were some concerns among administration, and this has given them an opportunity to highlight those and really clarify and provide us with a lot of information on it. And I really thank the administrators for doing that. I know it's not easy to put yourself in a position where you are recommending something that the vast majority of our parent community disagrees with. And I know that puts you in a difficult position. But I appreciate your doing it, and I appreciate your bringing to our attention the risks that you've put there. And I think they're real risks. There is risk whenever you do anything, and there's even more risk when you let your kids out of the school environment and take them to more of a camp environment and have them overnight. So I very much appreciate all of that. Then I ask myself what I can add as a board member, and I think as a board member, I sort of view my responsibility as to make, the kind of on behalf of the community, the bigger decision of risk and reward. So we know we have a risk. I'm willing to believe that even with the options that we've put forward, that we can't completely eliminate that risk. And the question is whether the reward is worth continuing to run that risk. As I think about it, I think that the reward is worth the risk. I think for many of our families, this will be the one opportunity to have a camp-like setting for their kids growing up. For many kids, they'll have other opportunities. There are Indian Scouts and Indian Princesses. I'm fortunate enough to be able to send my kids to a 3-week summer camp, every summer. I was fortunate enough as a kid to go to an 8-week summer camp, when I was these ages. But not everybody is. And for whatever reason, school has become a place where there is this sort of defining outdoor ad overnight experience. And I'd hate to eliminate it. So, while I appreciate that there's risk, while I would feel sick if in the next year something bad did happen, nonetheless, we can't eliminate it, and I don't think we ought to make our decisions based purely on risk aversion. So, my inclination is to continue the program as it is, with perhaps with a nod to administration that to the extent you feel any of these options would help, that I'm all for you exploring, any or all of them to the extent, you feel that would be helpful. So that's where I am at this point.
John, well, thank you for saying that, because you said it much more eloquently than I was going to be able to say it. I very closely echo your sentiments. I'd like to thank the administration, particularly at the end. You put together a really nice piece saying, look, we realize that we might not take our recommendation. If not, here's some really good things to do to mitigate risk. And I'd really like to see us do those things. I'd like to see us put that parent team together and see if we can do even more things to reduce the risk. But I want to thank you, because it is hard to come forward with what you think will be an unpopular decision. And so not only thank you here, but please keep doing it. Even though, in closed session and other things, you brought forth good cases. None of them were compelling enough to push me over the edge, although I got close. I mean, it's a tough decision. But please, in the future, don't ever be afraid, just because if this one doesn't happen to go that way, to please keep bringing the hard decisions to us. You've always done it, and I want to just encourage you to do it more, because I really, really commend you for doing so, and please keep it up.
Any other board members like to make a comment?
I would like to make one comment on behalf of administration, because the information that you read has been presented tonight did not come lightly. It has circulated from principals all the way to the top. And as superintendent, I have to tend to certainly agree with my team. That's my job, to protect kids. And my job is also to publicly, for the record, remind the board that the board is ultimately responsible, the district and the board is ultimately responsible for those actions that happen out there. That has to become part of the record this evening. I'm hoping we can move forward and do that. I want to make sure the board understands their responsibility in these activities moving forward.
Thank you, Dr. Bender. Final call for any comments from the board. And if there are no other further comments, I'd like to take a motion.
I see no motion here.
There is one.
There is a motion.
There is a motion.
It's the
Action
page
item
before
1402-3.
Page before the memo begins.
Tony, I guess my question would be, if we know we don't have the votes, why would we even vote?
Make the motion and let it die. You can follow Robert's Rules of Order and simply make the motion if there's no second.
Yeah, if there's no section, the motion dies.
Do we need let's say that just theoretically the board members wouldn't vote for this recommendation, but at least I, as one board member, really like the alternative recommendations. Do we need a motion for that, or can we just give you board consensus to go forward with that?
I think board consensus would be sufficient.
Yeah, my personal reaction is that none of these options rise to the level of items that need board approval.
Yeah.
So probably the way I'd probably even do less. I'd probably not give you any statement on those options. I think you've heard several of us say we encourage you to explore them. But if you were to explore one and decide it doesn't make sense, I don't want to put you in a position where the board has done something that means you must do it. So I'd rather leave it to their discretion.
Even the idea of the changing the forms and reducing the liability and things of that nature. I mean, that was something you brought up that was very real to me and made me say, wait a minute, I'm not sure that we should have the overnight component, but it sounds like at least some of the liability has been mitigated. So
I might suggest that you've made 3 suggestions. Should the board not want to go ahead and cancel the program, you've made 3 suggestions, alternatives in areas that you would like to at least push forward. Those three areas are pretty significant areas, one of which is expanding the parent chaperone training, which is near and dear to my heart, and I believe that flipping the responsibility onto the parents, knowing that education is a shared responsibility, and asking the parents to come through and with spending more time in training and utilizing the Camp Duncan experience with training the chaperones. I mean, really making it as robust as possible, and then see where that would take us. I mean, that was one of your recommendations, and I think let's take your recommendations and run with it, and let's see where that goes. I think that will perhaps take us further down the road.
I agree in part. I think I've gone back and forth about this, and I'll share a couple personal thoughts that won't be popular, but I have not really understood the intense devotion to the overnight component. I don't disrespect it, I just don't understand it, and I don't see, I do see the risk as greater than the reward with this. So I would have voted to go ahead with the administration's recommendations. At the very least, I would like to see, I don't know if we can amend this or come up with something else, but I would like to see something, if we are going to go ahead with the overnight component, that we absolutely have something with teeth to provide not just additional training, but accountability for the parents. I think that's absolutely essential, and I would not feel comfortable sending my child to somewhere if the administration had not fostered that. So I would highly encourage us to come up with those additional recommendations.
Very good. Dr. Bender, just as a prudent policy, should we make the motion and then let it die with no second?
I think if you want to follow Robert's Rules of Order, you can do that, since it is, just let the action die. One of the things, just to kind of piggyback on Dathan, there was a mention of redoing forms. That certainly kicks in with the concerns that you have. The contract with Camp Duncan certainly has to be redone. Our attorney has indicated to us it is definitely a one-sided contract, so we can certainly begin negotiating with them to bring that contract in line with how legal sees that it should be. So I think we have what we need to move forward without making any action. John, you've been president before. Any thoughts of how you think procedurally?
Procedurally, I'm not sure it matters whether somebody makes a motion and it's defeated or whether no one makes the motion.
Just let it go.
Yeah.
That being said, I don't think we need a motion at this point. So, yeah. So I think there's been enough direction here, Lori, and I think we'd like to hear back from you at some future date once you've had the opportunity to sit down, speak to members of the community, and see what you can pull together to enhance those areas that you've suggested.
Great, thank you.
All right. Okay, next item is the awarding of the contract for regular and summer school transportation. Becky?
If you recall, in late October, the current provider of our bus service approached the district because we were at the end of the first three-year term, and they indicated that they would not ask for an extension, which they were entitled to, for the next 2 years unless we were willing to give them a substantial increase in the cost of the contract. We declined their invitation to increase the contract, and so we took it out to bid. And the process resulted in 6 vendors, including the current contractor, submitting bids that were opened on Wednesday, February 5th. The lowest bidder is Lakeview Bus Lines, and it is our recommendation that we award the contract to Lakeview based upon their current contracts and their qualifications of their references. I found it interesting when we were doing the reference checks. Comments range from if they say they'll be there, they will be, which was important right after the cold weather issue that we responded to. very sensitive to kids' needs, both for regular and special ed transportation, and they respond immediately with any concerns. Lakeview, we only requested in our bid submittal a one-year cost, and Lakeview submitted an alternate proposal for a 3-year cost with no increase for the second year and then a modest increase for the third year. And we are recommending that we award the contract based upon their alternate proposal, which was a 3-year fixed cost. Fixed in the sense that the route costs are fixed, not necessarily in the total cost, because if our needs go up and down, then that the actual contract would go up or down. So we are asking you, the Board of Education, tonight to award the contract to Lakeview Bus Lines.
Please, if there's any questions on the board, I have a few myself. So, Scott?
Becky, one quick one and then maybe one that's a little longer. After 1 or 2 years, we have termination options?
The way the school code reads is that we originally award the contract based on a 3-year contract, and then there are options that we can award it for an additional 2 years, and thereafter on 1-year renewals. And if you'll recall, when we did this 3 years ago, it was the first time in over 20 years that we had actually bid transportation.
One of the things I remember when we did this a few years ago, there was a larger presentation and everything, and there was a lot of focus on some of the safety and security issues offered by this company. They had GPSs, and you could kind of tell where buses were and like that. Are we losing anything by changing this company? So all those key points, and I'd have to go back in my notes and look at what they were, but they're all taken care of.
That's almost standard in the industry today.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that they were covered. Thank you.
Becky,
You will be able to watch on a big video screen those buses as they move around the district.
I've got some practical questions.
Sure.
For instance, the first thing is, what exactly is mandated of the district by the state regarding transportation for elementary schools? I really don't have a clue as to what we actually have to provide.
Anybody who lives in excess of 1.5 miles is provided free transportation. This district, we also provide paid riders for those students who live within 1.5 miles of their attendance center, if there's room on those routes. So if we already had, most of our buses are 71 passengers. So if we were bringing, a route was coming into, let's say, Roosevelt, and they had 69 kids on there, we probably wouldn't add any pay riders to that particular route. But if we have room, we do allow students to pay us who live within the 1.5 miles.
Do you happen to know the numbers of the number of students who live beyond the 1.5 mile marker versus the percent of riders that are under 1.5 miles?
Not with me tonight.
Okay. And the other question is, are our buses filled to capacity? Because I noticed the number of routes that are driven, and I'm wondering if those routes are maximized to capacity, thinking that the cost might change if the number of routes or buses or something would decrease.
We run very efficient routes, and we do fill those routes as full as we can, and to limit the amount of time that the students are on the bus.
All right, and that's looked at yearly, probably, depending on the demand.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions from the board? If there's no questions from the board, I'd like to have a motion on this.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, enter into a 3-year transportation contract beginning with the 2014-15 school year with Lakeview Bus Lines Incorporated for the 2014-15 route cost is $812,596. The 2015-16 cost is $812,596,000, and the 2016-17 cost is $847,208.
Second.
Great. Why don't we take a vote starting on Dan's side?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Yes.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right. 7-0. The next item is the approval of the field HVAC contract.
Good evening. This is Ed Sawa with Fannie and Howie. He will be leading our presentation this evening. The Board of Education went out to bid for the HV mechanical, for the mechanical improvements at Field. The bids came back, and you'll see a tab sheet on that in your book. We had quite a nice turnout. Our bids were relatively close, which was very nice, so we have a very good idea that the project is priced properly. Originally, we had a approximate design cost of $6,190,091. When we got down to the construction documents piece of it is where we made our final cost projection, and that was dated December 11th. We had approximate cost of $5,324,285. The bid came back. Bergen Construction was low bid. They are also the people that did the Washington project for us in 2010. That amount came back from Bergen Construction Corporation at $4,533,000, and that's what we will be asking you to approve this evening. Ed will go over some of the preliminary work that we have done with Bergen to make sure that they understand the scope of work.
Thank you, Scott. Again, my name is Ed Sawa, and I've been working closely with Carrie, and you all know Carrie, and I spent some time with her again today, and she's breathing heavier and so forth because of what she's going to be a mother here shortly, as you well know. So we were able to spend some time with her, and we have lately in regards to your project here. So what I want to do is just go over some items. Scott mentioned some items, but what I would like to do is go into some detail in regards to how we came to a conclusion regarding this bid. And as you look at the bid tabulation form, it lists, of course, all the bids that were received, as Scott has just described. But what we did is we interviewed the three lowest bidders, the three lowest responsive bidders, which in this particular case was Bergen, Stuckey Construction, and Aubrey Construction. So we met with them in our office, and Scott, of course, was part of that, and so were other team members with Fanning Howey and consultants, and we went through a number of questions just to visit and review what was part of the documents. And that is shown, that document, the bid review meeting, is right after the bid tab. So this basically, before we had these meetings, we developed these questions, and there's like 50-something questions that we went over one by one with all of the three bidders that we just talked about. And again, and confirmed that they had that the documents were covered with their bid. And again, we're able to meet the players who would be part of the project, and we're able to come to a conclusion based on those meetings with the three lowest bidders. The lowest bid that was submitted was by Bergen Construction, and that's who the recommendation is for your approval this evening, is again for Bergen Construction in the amount that Scott had indicated at $4,533,000. The other item that was submitted was the project schedule, and that is, of course, that's part of what you have received as the package, and it identifies how, the preliminary schedule identifies how Bergen Construction is planning on running the project if they are approved or awarded this evening. And of course, we all know that it is a tight schedule. It's a summer project, basically. There'll be some pre-work being done ahead of time, but they have prepared a schedule that shows it being complete, substantially complete, on August 8th of this year, of course, which is in accordance to what the documents require. So with all that being said, again, the recommendation is to award the bid to Bergen Construction in the amount of $4,533,000 even.
Does the board have any questions? I have a few.
I have a couple questions on this. One is the schedule. So I think I saw that it was not starting until, was it the April 15th? It's a little bit of an ironic day, but anyway, the tax day. So why is it that we couldn't start this spring break?
The reason is that we are demoing the current heat plan system in here, and that'll be the first thing that we have to do is get that out. to make room in the boiler room to bring the new equipment in. So we will begin that piece of it as soon as the heating season is completed.
So you don't believe the heating season is going to be done by the end of March? Is that what you're telling me?
That's what yeah, probably not. If it's hard to say. But we will be doing some preliminary work over spring break related to the project, and that will be some asbestos abatement and some of the piping.
Okay, but
So-
you won't be able to demo because the heating
Correct.
system would
Yeah.
still maybe have to be used.
Yes, there will be a few things that we can do, and we've talked with Bergen about it. There's, we can we need to put some floor drains down in the basement, and we can come in after hours and saw some concrete and put some floor drains. So there's a few things that we can do to get the project started, which I can assure you we will be doing that as soon. If this approval comes tonight, I'll be meeting with Bergen this week, and we will be starting some of those things as far as reviewing what we need to do internally within the building and make arrangements to get all of that information together so that I can have a meeting with the staff and inform them of the process and what will be expected of them within their rooms and things like that. So we will continue to start that right away.
And then are we going to discuss Carpenter? Is that on our agenda?
Well,
Not really on
it's
our-
not on the agenda, but it's certainly part of this
Well,
discussion,
Okay,
yes.
so let's raise it then.
Well,
so-
I not to cut you off.
No,
but
go ahead.
I was going to suggest talking about the field system. Is the field system a complex system? I'm not an HVAC guy at all, but I know that some are more complex than others. More complexity suggests that there might be more things that go wrong. And I say that as a lead-in because there are some current problems going on in the Carpenter building. There's been suggestions that it's the equipment. There's been suggestions it's the installation. There's some suggestions it's design. There's some suggestions that it's a poor envelope. So there's lots of stuff going on. We don't want to have that same problem here. We want this to be bulletproof as much as it can be, understanding that you're always going to have to tweak things down the road. But we don't want to have what's going on here while we're fixing Carpenter, which is a priority, and that will happen, but we don't want to have to undergo the same process here. So I was wondering if, since it's up in the air now, if you could perhaps give us, if you're prepared, to give us a background on really where we are, the state of the state regarding Carpenter building, and maybe you can also compare the systems a little bit, if you can, to give us some assurance that perhaps the system that's going in place here in Field might be immune to some of those disorders that are affecting Carpenter.
I'm sorry, Charlie Johnsos. I'd rather address that than Ed. He's primarily focused on Fields, and although he's aware of what's going on at Carpenter, he's not as intimately involved as I am. To answer your first question, they are completely different systems. The system being proposed tonight for approval is a VRV system, which has been in existence and in use in this climate for a very long time. The VRF system, which is at the Carpenter, is more new to this system and not. They are different. They are completely different.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? That doesn't really help me a whole lot. So what is it that's
I'm sorry,
different?
say it again, sir.
What is it that's different about those two systems?
One is, the difference. I'm not a mechanical engineer. I can't speak to the difference.
I'll do my best to explain the difference. At Carpenter, it's a VRF system. It's a variable refrigerant flow system. And we use refrigerant to provide the heating and the cooling for that system. And it works out of cassettes that are located in each classroom. 2 cassettes in the ceiling located in each classroom. And really, I guess, in a simplistic way to do that, the Carpenter system is a heat pump system that is backed up with additional heat through boilers. And as we heat the water for the boiler, we transfer that heat to the heat pump system, and that's how we generate our heat at Carpenter. And then it moves off of that into the classrooms. And on the roof, then we have what's called ERV systems, and that's our fresh air system. that comes in. So we really have two systems at Carpenter. One is the heating and air conditioning system, and the other one is the fresh air supply system, and that's the ERVs. When you get into field, the project here, it's a VAV system, and that is the identical system that we have at Emerson. It'll be the same type of system that we have at Emerson, and also the same type of system that we just upgraded at Franklin. And that'll also have the, here we have all the upgrades that were originally not part of Franklin, but that we did last year. So that system is generated by boilers, by hot water circulating through the system instead of the refrigerant. And then it heats the coil, the fans blow across it and put warm air into the system. And in the air conditioning season, it does the exact opposite. It pulls the heat out of the building and allows it to be cooled. So does that get you? Does that help you?
A little bit, but I guess then I sort of begs the question about why we went with the less understood system, or at least that's what it sounds like, at Carpenter.
Primarily because of the configurations of your buildings. They're different. This building is a two-story building. There's or three-story building. It's a multiple-story building versus your Carpenter site. So they're different buildings and access, the ability to put them in.
Yeah, the VRF system, it's when we put it in there, they're very generally very reliable and very wonderful systems. We have definitely had our challenges at Carpenter. I cannot admit, cannot deny that, cannot diminish the importance of the problems that we've had at Carpenter. Will not diminish the problems that it's caused the staff at Carpenter. None of us sit here tonight satisfied with that we've got the answer yet. We're making a lot of progress. We're doing a lot of headway, and nobody's walking away from the table. And that is very, very big on a project like this with the issues that we have that some people just haven't gotten up and walking away from the table. And that's not happening. We had some issues this morning. We lost a compressor this morning. That compressor will be replaced on Wednesday. We do have the system back up and providing heat for us. The cause of that we'll know when we get the compressor out and do some analysis on it. Right now it's just kind of a guess as to what happened. But, so I don't want to elaborate on that because I don't have all the information yet. But I can tell you, service techs were at the building within 25 minutes and the heat was running within 25 minutes of the time that it went down. So, that's, although they're still chilly in there, and I understand that, it's important for people to know that we're there when there's a problem, and we will get this system resolved. We've made great headway on it, and the Carpenter system will work. But as far as the design difference goes, it really is, Terry, it really is based upon the building needs. And the VAV system here on a multi-story level is what makes the most sense from a design standpoint. And we have reviewed these documents extensively. Addendum 3 that went out was an additional item that we put on some of the baseboard, the fin tube in the 51 edition on the kindergarten side down there. What we learned at Carpenter was helpful here, and we did include and put some heat back into those cabinets along that single-story piece of the building in there. So we have made some changes, and I can assure you, we have spent, and John Ember, who's sitting in the back, will also come up and verify that if it's important for him to do that, that we have double-checked, cross-checked, triple-checked. I mean, we're very, very comfortable with the design of this project. And while it seems that the two are related, they're really not related. We have a different contractor here. As a matter of fact, we went back through, there's not a same contractor from a subcontractor anywhere that is the same as the people that worked on Carpenter. This is a totally new, totally different crew, and they have a very good track record. We did our due diligence on their work. They did an excellent job for us at Washington. And yes, when Washington and Roosevelt got done, we had issues those first years, and we corrected them and worked with them. Not as extensive as we had at Carpenter, but we did have issues. So I can tell you, feel very, very comfortable about this. If I had hesitation, I would tell you that I had hesitation. But I have none.
I think what's interesting, I mean, and to be honest, I don't think the community is sort of faulting any of the contractors specifically, but I think Fannie and Howie is who they're faulting, right? And so some questions about why we're approving another project a large-scale project with them. Now, whether that's true or not, I can't judge that, but I think it does put us in a pretty bad spot right now, given the Carpenter situation. So it's just reality.
I'll second that. I mean, I'm getting those same kind of concerns. And again, it's not the techs or you or, individual people or, people who get the, heating online, immediately after. I know everybody's busting their hump to get this working right. But that doesn't really answer the main question, which is the whole system or the installation faulty? And not knowing the answer to that fully, I think, makes a lot of people lack some confidence in putting a lot of dollars into a system that once we get going, are we going to be able to back out or change something if we discover that what was going on at Carpenter could happen again at Field? I guess my specific question is with the VRF, if every day that the heating isn't working perfectly in the building, and I start with the presupposition that the heating should be working perfectly every day, if every one of those days that it's not working perfectly is a blip, how many blips are there with the other type of system, which is at Emerson and then will be at Field and is now at Franklin, correct? How frequently are we having blips?
With the systems at Emerson and with the systems at, let me give you a little history. When I started here 3 years ago, we had nothing but problems with the air conditioning in Emerson. I mean, it never worked. It never worked, and it was 13 years old, and it never worked. And I took a look at it. I actually brought Fanny and Howie in on it, and the compressors would go. Once a year, every compressor would go. They would just blow. And they had additional compressors in stock in the district so that when they blew, they could go back right away and replace them. So I hired Fanny and Howie and our contractor Harding Heating, and I said, why are these compressors going? It was a design flaw from the very beginning on the, believe it or not, on the type of 90-degree angle that was on the piping for the refrigerant and the oil flow coming back, lubricating the compressors. So 2 years ago, we redid that piping. And the system is working fantastic now. So there's always blips, Nathan, I understand that. There's always items that can go bad. But I can tell you with Carpenter, when the system is working and we don't have any mechanical flaws on it or some of the issues that we've had, it heats the building. It keeps the building warm. There is the exception of those 4 classrooms that we need to do some work with on some insulation and adding some heat. And we do need to add some heat in the hallways. We know that, and we will do that over the summer. But the system itself, the design of it and the system of it works. It's really a mechanical piece that we're having the problems with at this point in time. It's really equipment related, and I can't explain it any other way than it's that. It's really not a design issue, with the exception of we need to add a couple of additional units and do some more insulation on those 4 classrooms that we had.
And that's kind of what I was going to discuss. One of the things, Dr. Burley, you had asked last time we were here was to review those documents and walk through those buildings, and that occurred last Wednesday and Monday. We went through all of those, and that's exactly what was determined. There are I would say under-designed is really what it was. It's not poorly designed. It's still the right system. It's not complete, I think is the way to put it. And as Scott pointed out, we will be looking at adding heat in those 4 rooms and some supplemental heat within the corridors, as well as looking at building envelope exteriors, particularly at the walls. And it goes through the process. We're eliminating the variables. We had determined some design issues. We modified operationally so that we got some consistency on Monday. We did that. We've done some other diagnostic testing that have gone through. And I agree with Scott that at this point it's equipment that we're finding continuously issues. And one of the questions that was asked of me today was this the equipment we had designed for? And actually the basis of design was a different piece of equipment, but this was an acceptable alternate. And the second question you might ask yourself, and was also asked me today, is would we recommend this system again somewhere else? And the question, I can't answer that today because we haven't completely determined why the equipment is failing, and if it is equipment failure or if it's a combination of equipment and the way it's being operated, connected, and all these other pieces. So to your point, it's completely different scenarios, completely different questions, but it comes down to a trust factor. At this point, you guys are looking at us going, I don't get it, and I don't trust it. And I understand that. And it's a challenge to ask you tonight to prove something when you're in a position of you're questioning our trust.
Let me add something to that,
Please,
Tony.
please.
And I appreciate that. I guess a couple thoughts, questions are, number one, where is the accountability from the last time? I'm sure that whoever was in charge went through a similar process and made sure that the mechanics and the people and the design and all of that stuff was A-okay. Nobody just kind of said, it looks good, let's do it. But now we have several problems with it. What is different about this process so that we can feel comfortable knowing that it's not going to happen again?
I think you're comparing, I think you're asking the difference between how Carpenter was designed and how Field was designed. Is that
Not
what you're
the design, the process of approving everything, including the design, the people, all of that stuff.
Okay.
Because I'm sure nobody planned on this happening at Carpenter.
No.
Nobody said, this is probably going to happen, let's do it anyway. Okay,
Yeah.
so somehow something was missed. Everybody sounds confident that Field is not going to have this problem. Why should we believe that? What's different about this process that didn't happen before?
I would have to say not a lot, to be quite honest with you. I mean, there's a certain process that you go through, and I don't mean that to sound, that we didn't do the due diligence or that we didn't do the work. We're Fannie and Howie in their design, myself in my reviews. It's a process that we go through. It's the same process that we go through all the time. We check the specs. We make sure that the equipment meets the specifications. We make sure that the contractor that installing it is a solid contractor, financially responsible, and has a good track record. The process is the same. I have to say the process is the same, Dathan, and it might not be what you want to hear, but
I
really
appreciate
think,
you being honest about it, number one,
no,
and
but,
not giving me
yeah,
some
but
glossy
we've-
answer.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, but we have paid much more, I guess, closer attention to some of the, and maybe you want to talk about that, but from my standpoint, I know that the due diligence that we did here on this contractor and looking at this system, was probably quadruple checked instead of triple checked. If that is a change, which it is a change.
The only point I would add to that is one of the components that we did check for, but it's easier to check with this, with Field, is how many times have you installed this? The number of installations that Bergen has done are quite a bit more because the system's been in place for a longer duration. So the experience of putting in these types of systems is greater.
Appreciate that. That's helpful. My last question, I'm sorry to be driving this so much. I'm not sorry. Is where is the accountability? And I'm not saying that in an accusing way. What happens if we go ahead and approve this tonight and then we have the same problem? Is somebody going to be held accountable for that other than us?
Yeah. Well, I think that.
And I apologize, Scott, because I do want to hear what you have to say. From a accountability perspective, we're still accountable. We still owe you some things as it relates to Carpenter, and you're still going to get those things. And as it relates to, and I think you might be specifically, how are you paying for this? That's something we will deal with. That's a bridge we will cross together. And it was a question, actually, this same board asked us, at least Mr. Zimmerman was on that committee at the time, is how do we address those things? And the biggest answer we gave, and you might recall it, is we're still here to talk about it, and we continue to be here to support those efforts. And at the end of the day, in some cases, it's not just talking. And I would say that Fannie Howie will do that. We're going to be here either for Carpenter or Fields, and God willing, anything else you guys might be doing in the future. So in terms of accountability, I guess the chickens haven't come to roost because we haven't gotten to the point where we know where the distribution of that burden is going to be carried, if that's fair.
What are the implications of delaying this for a month? What
sorry.
are the implications of delaying this vote for a month? Because I guess at some level, I don't feel comfortable that the Carpenter issues have been resolved, right? Even as late as today. So I guess from one board member's standpoint, I would, doesn't look like the schedule starts until March or February or April anyway.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. You want to answer that, Ed? Okay. Well, there's a couple of things that I would say with that, and you guys can pick up what I miss on. Bid results are good for 60 days. After that, we have to go back out and rebid it. If we did go out and rebid it, and if we didn't get an approval this evening, we would be pushed for scope review, which would be, looking at all the components that they're going to bring in as far as from equipment. Go through that, get that approved, get it on order, and get it in time to get the project completed. So that's one of the reasons that we go out early, is because the process after this is really when the work begins to start the project. And if we were to delay that for a month, we would not be able to get the project done. I'm quite positive of that. Okay. Did I miss anything?
The only thing I would add is that going out and rebidding part, if you had to go to that, a lot of contractors, you would lose many of the 8 because they've seen all the other contractors' numbers by now. So it's no longer as competitive.
Okay, thanks.
Well, you said 60 days, Scott, and we have another board meeting on March 24th, and I would hope we would have an update from Carpenter. Do you think we could still meet our goals if we just put,
I don't think we would. I don't think we could. No, I really and truly don't think we would be able to get the scope review on the equipment and all the submittals in from the contractors and check all the equipment and be able to get it on order and get the project done. I don't see that. I don't see that happening. I will tell you that something that Bergen and actually Stuckey and Albright, they all shared with us, and they shared with me at that meeting. And one of the reasons that the prices did come in as competitively as they did was the blueprints and the plans that Fannie and Howie gave them were so thorough that they certainly understood all of the project and felt very comfortable moving forward with it in a time frame. There's usually a lot of questions from contractors about what needs to be done, and we have to go back and kind of review the plans with them. All 3 contractors were very complimentary of the design that we had at Field, and they all 3 felt very comfortable with the system that would be coming in.
Scott,
if that helps, but that's just what they told me.
Was that the same feeling from the folks at the beginning of Carpenter?
We did not get that comment. Not that it's bad that you don't get that comment, but I found it very encouraging that we got that comment. Not from one, but all 3 of them, and I really felt that they meant that. So it was a benefit to us on the price standpoint that we came in at.
Yeah, it might not be the feeling you'd get from folks at Carpenter when it's
Oh, absolutely not.
either,
No,
right?
no.
So-
Yeah, and again, Terry, I don't want to diminish what's going on at Carpenter. No, there's no one here that's happy with that.
Yep.
When you talk about accountability, Dathan, every player is there working very, very hard. I can't even begin to tell you how hard we're working to try to figure this thing out, and we're making headway. We're doing all of the right things, and we just keep at it. We just keep at it. Nobody's running. Nobody's running away. So I understand the issues there, and I have full compassion for what's going on over there with the staff. They've been wonderful, but they're at their limit, and I can't say that I blame them. I've been at my limit for a little while too. And if it was a case of someone saying, "Hey, you know what? Forget you guys. I'm walking away," but nobody's done that. Nobody has done that. Everybody has worked very, very diligently and very hard to get these issues solved, and they are getting solved. We are solving them, and this system will be working.
Scott, not to cut you off, I'm sorry. 2 questions. One is an operational question, and one is a design question. You mentioned before that the Carpenter situation perhaps is under-designed. And if that's the case, obviously there'll need to be a supplemental heating system applied there to heat those 4 rooms, some of the corridors and things like that. When do you think that phase is going to be enacted upon, completed? This heating system, summertime, when can we see some improvements in the situation in Carpenter?
Well, as far as, I think we are seeing improvements, but as far as the design of adding the additional heat, we won't be able to do that really until summer because we need to take the system 100% down, completely down. We need to, in order to add cassettes into these rooms and in these hallways, we need to do some repiping. So the whole system has to come down, it has to be drained, it won't be functional. So I don't see us even attempting to do that until after school is out. It'll still work and it'll still perform, but on the design issue, kind of the lack of, I don't want to call it lack of design, but we certainly, maybe it is a lack of design, okay? Yeah, under design. But we do need to add some things in there, but not now. We'll do that when the kids are out of the building.
Will that work at Carpenter that's expected to be done at Carpenter have any impact at the anticipated work to be done at Field?
Absolutely not. They are not. They will not be related at all. Totally different people.
Okay. Then what do you plan to do in the interim for the situations in the rooms? Continually moving these classrooms around is quite disruptive. What can we do in the interim to implant some heat in these rooms so that they can be utilized prior to shutting down the system and doing an overhaul?
Well, what we've done in the, there's 4 classrooms that we need to add heat into. One of them was the old art room, and there was an existing electric univent that was in there that we just reconnected. So the art room is fine right now. The music room, that room we're keeping up with very well. We only had issues in that room when it was well below 0, but we have put a temporary heater in that room, and we're not using that in that room at all anymore because we're fine now from that standpoint, from the temperature. In room 100 and in room 102, we have upped the temperature on the ERV, and we have added just two small temporary heaters in there, and we are not having any issues with keeping up with the heat in those rooms at this time now. Go ahead.
Those will kick on, Scott, when and if the system goes down. Is that what happens?
No, they're supplemental heat. They're in addition to what's currently in the room.
Okay, so it's not as if they'll kick on when the other system's not working.
No, they will not kick on. They are just temporary on their own individual units. But in those rooms now, we've had no heat issues in those rooms. Can I knock on wood? Yeah, we've had no issues in those rooms.
My second question was a design question, and some of the concern of what's occurring at Carpenter was alluded to an envelope failure, if you will. Cold air infiltration, negating some of the heat output. I get it. I get that can happen. But 2 parts of this. I direct your attention to a letter dated November 8th, 2011. And in this letter, it said that there was benchmarking reports provided by Johnson Controls State Energy Design Assistance Center, a level 3 report on Carpenter Elementary School. So an analysis of the envelope was performed at Carpenter. And in lieu of Fanning Howey Associates, and I'm reading this, performing the analysis, Fanning and Howey reviewed the reports and found them equivalent to their own analysis process and reporting method. So apparently, what was done in the evaluation of Carpenter was found to be very effective, and you went with that process. So no further testing of the envelope was done at Carpenter. And because that report was so good, a recommendation was made, no envelope testing was to be performed at Field. Now, I'm concerned about that because if an analysis of the envelope at Carpenter was performed, and now the envelope is being considered to have some failure, and no analysis of Field has been performed, what's to lead me to believe there won't be a failure of the envelope at Field?
I want to address the first question primarily about Carpenter. I think in the subsequent letter that was dated February 18th, in terms of a follow-up and an update, I would not articulate the envelope as the primary source of failure on your system. It's a contributing factor, particularly to those 4 rooms, but it's not the sole factor, and that's why there's both a heating component and some billing envelope. Initially, we were looking at both windows and wall. Now it's primarily just wall where units were and now are gone. That unlike a unit ventilator where we would expect outside infiltration that we'd have to address, it was more than we expected. And that goes to the under design part, is that we expected X, and we took the worst of the rooms and extrapolated it everywhere, and it was Y. It was more than that. That doesn't mean that we think the building envelope is the biggest issue anymore. It's no longer the greatest concern at Carpenter.
Well, that being said, is there any way to look at field and try to look into the future and determine if there's any unexpected envelope issues?
And that's where as Scott pointed out, the addendum addressed some changes where we're not completely removing some of the fin tube at the exterior wall. So that has been the reaction, if you will, the solution of not wanting to have a repeat.
So that would be the quadruple check component.
Well, that would be putting in the addendum. I would like to address one other comment about the delay or the opportunity to push this off till next month. You're still going to be in the same position as Scott pointed out. The solutions in its entirety for Carpenter aren't going to be totally resolved until this summer when we can implement all of the changes. So, and I'm not suggesting that between now and March, all of the wonderful teachers that have been enduring and moving themselves, that we won't get a compressor that goes down again, God willing, and the creek don't rise. We don't want that, and we're monitoring those things to ensure that they aren't. But assuming all the system is functioning, it's still not operating as entirely as we want it to, but is functioning and that things don't break down. There, and with the supplement heat that's currently being added to until the cooling season, we don't expect anybody to have to move their room. If the system continues to operate, and I will say that when System 2 went down in advance of our last board meeting, we had a good week. We had a good 2 weeks where things were operating well. The irony even of this last failure is that the team was out over the weekend testing and balancing the system on Saturday, and within hours after their departure, because at 7:30 on Saturday evening it broke. So I mean, I guess the overarching question is field as the project it stands. It's again a completely different system, been double and triple checked, and we've done the due diligence on the contractor who's installed many of these systems, approval to be done. And the Carpenter issue is in itself its own issue, and it's a separate discussion that we will continue to have and continue to support the solutions and resolutions as we get them.
Are there any other board comments or questions?
Well, I see the building principal. I don't want to put you on the spot, but
Please.
but I would like, I'd like to hear your thoughts
About,
from Brett.
oh, I'm sorry.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Mrs. Lee. It's been a challenging time at Carpenter. I think you guys know that. I appreciate the fact that my staff has been reaching out to kind of share information with you. I wish it wasn't happening. I wish that you weren't receiving emails from my staff about what's going on in our building, but unfortunately it is. I don't know how connected this is with the field project, and I definitely don't want what's going on at Carpenter. I know it's a challenging situation for the board, but it's a challenging situation for us at Carpenter. Started the day this morning again at 7:30, walking into the building with one of my zones out that had no heat, and that's why you got a lot of the emails this morning. It also happened last week. And as a building principal, I'm hoping it's not happening next week during ISATs, because that will be quite a challenge for us. Typically, as a building principal, our staff's been enduring a lot, and they have been exceptionally flexible. They've been exceptionally understanding, but I think, as Mr. Mackel shared earlier, they are probably at the point of extreme frustration of what's going on in our building. It's difficult to share this information to the parent community. It's difficult to share it with our children. And we just want to make sure that Carpenter is fixed, and I know that that's what they're working on. I don't necessarily know if it's all just those 4 rooms. I think that there's more. There's other issues, the way that the cassettes are in the classrooms, that I find as a building principal, as you walk in, the air temperature in the rooms isn't quite even throughout the rooms. You have issues where the desks and where the kids are sitting is a lot colder, and I don't know if that's from the airflow coming down from the cassettes. It's not coming down. It's not being equally distributed throughout the whole rooms. So there's different points in the different rooms that there's different temperatures. I don't know how to answer that. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be. But when you do sit down in a chair in a classroom, the chair is cold, which doesn't make sense to me. I'm hoping that these situations get resolved, because as a building principal, I want to come in and do my job as a building principal and not have to be concerned about moving classrooms because they're 50 degrees. So that's basically all I have to say. Thank you. Has anyone got any questions from an educational standpoint?
I do have a question about sort of coming in at 7:30 in the morning and finding out that it's 50 degrees. I guess, so what is the maintenance sort of, I guess, hours and criteria? I mean, if we know this is happening, then what is it that we're really doing in terms of having people on site? Or is there a beeper that goes off? This tells you how old I am. But something that goes off when the system goes down. I guess I want to understand why that would be this morning, would have happened.
At this point, our first line of defense is maintenance coming on site. But the ultimate point, as we discussed last time, was getting your DDC controls or your temperature controls connected so that Scott and or Vince get their phone alarms and says, hey, the system is down.
So when did we get that alarm?
That has been started on a Monday. We started to bring items online. But as you recall from the letters in front of you, we took that off to eliminate that as an issue. We took the systems off of the controls, monitoring the controls, because we wanted to eliminate that as an issue of concern. There are 4 rooms that have been placed on and have been operating, but we're not that whole system hasn't been put on to the controls. But we're working to get that, and through the balancing this week, we're going to get a lot closer to getting all the systems back online, where you'll have the remote access to those systems.
Okay, so I'm not sure that answered my question, Scott. So when is it that you get notified when the system goes down?
And currently, when the custodian comes into the building in the morning, that's when I get notified.
So you get no notice before then?
No, I do not. No. No, that's part of what Charlie said with the DDC controls. We thought the DDC controls were part of the problem. So during the severe cold weather, we took that equation out so that the system could run on its own, supplying heat, and not kind of going into the auto mode, just running on its own. We have, on last Monday, we started tying in the DDC controls into the LG system now. And we've tested that on 4 rooms. They're working perfectly fine. Everything is going very smooth on that piece of it. And we will transfer that over in the next week or 2 to the whole system. And once that's up and running, then I'll get the electronic notifications. But,
yeah, and I guess until then, Scott, I mean, it would seem to me that I, like Brett, don't want another letter about this issue coming to the board. And so, my advice would be, and hopefully the board would agree, that we would put the proper people controls in place if you can't get the electronic controls in place, so that by the time children are at school, that building is the appropriate temperature. And if that means somebody's got to be there at 5 in the morning, somebody's got to be there at 5 in the morning. Make sure that control is working.
Yes.
Terry, actually, one of the thoughts I've had, because we've done this at buildings we own, is you can find a temporary security guard or something like that. Yeah. And you can make part of their duties to walk around and take a temperature in a various room. And I think we ought to look at what it might cost us to say, let's hire someone to be there all night, every night, because 5 in the morning actually might not be there soon enough to get it warm. And say, you know what, let's find someone, and maybe it's our own guys with overtime, however it is, but let's find someone to walk through that building every night for the next couple of weeks or the next month or 2. See what that would cost us, and see if we could possibly put something together so that when it goes down and they sense it down, and maybe we train them to look at a couple of screens or whatever it is, they're calling you right away. So if it is at 2 in the morning, we can have an emergency tech out there. And that, to me, in terms of accountability, the team that's in place, contractors, general contractors, you know, I look at this as, would this be your best brochure if you were to sell this, your services to every other company out there? And as a school board, I think, you know, the community needs to know things. I'd like them to know that, hey, you know what, these companies are good companies. Maybe we got a lemon this time with this system, and they're going to fix it, whatever it is. But we're going to stand behind it. And when you call us at 2 a.m, someone from our team's going to be there to solve that problem before the kids get in. I think that's the kind of accountability I want to hear here. I understand we can get a bad unit or we can get a couple of bad compressors and we've had other complications. Let's take more steps than just reactive. Let's be proactive and get someone in those buildings. And you know what, quite honestly, maybe some of these vendors want to help us burden this cost a little bit.
Yep.
Scott, what is the time, and thank you, Scott, I think that's a great idea. What is the time that the building is occupied now? I know that you have some custodial folks there later in the evening, and they stay till X amount of time, and what time do folks start in the morning, and what's the delta, the gap between those?
Vince, the head custodian, arrives at the building between 6 and 6:30, and then the last person leaves at 11:30 at evening. We check it at 11:30 to make sure that it's running, and then when Vince gets there, that's the first thing he does is check to make sure that it's running. I have, in the past couple of weeks during this process, had a maintenance guy start at 4 o'clock in the morning. He's starting that again tomorrow. So I'll have a guy in the building at 4 o'clock in the morning, and if there's an issue, he knows what to do to reset the system to get it started. And then I also have the contractor, Applied Midwest Solutions, the LG contractor. Their phone is at their bedside, and I tell them, I will call you at 4 o'clock in the morning. And he lives very close, so he'll be there within 20 to 25 minutes, and we'll be able to keep that up. We can certainly extend those hours. We don't need to hire somebody to do that. We can do that in-house. That's perfectly fine that we do that. And it's a good idea.
And weekends as well, because, you know,
Yes.
it sounded to me like this problem is you walked out on Saturday night, it went down, and we had 24 to 36 hours before we noticed it.
Yeah.
We should not honestly have a window wider than 2 where we don't notice it. I mean, honestly, if we can do that with our own staff and they want to earn a little extra, and, you know, a couple guys are staggering it for a while until we get through the cold months.
Yeah, the buildings are used on the weekend by the Park District, and we have our staff in there. So we'll have them do a little bit more detailed inspection over the weekends. Right now, the general feel of the building was warm. It was the 4 or 5. How many classrooms today? 5 or 6?
How many classrooms were out?
Yeah.
The entire wing, 4th and 5th grade, in the art and music room.
Art room was still going because we had the
additional heater in there.
Yeah. So how many classrooms was it? 5 today?
Well, 6.
6? Okay.
6 homeroom classes, music classroom.
Yeah. So the building itself felt warm. It was inside those classrooms that wasn't. So we'll make sure that we have the weekend supervisors do a little bit more due diligence on that.
So a practical question then, Scott, if you have somebody there until midnight and somebody gets there at 4 in the morning, that's a 4-hour, let's say something happened at 12:01 as soon as they walked out the door and locked the door. What would be the heat loss building wide in that 4-hour period? I mean, I have to assume that there's some insulation there, the bricks hold the heat, the materials hold the heat. I mean, would there be an appreciable drop over 3 hours, 4 hours? My question being is that a reasonable amount of time to leave the building unguarded, if you will, or do we need to narrow that width of time?
I think that in the 4-hour time, well, we went down Saturday night. This morning we came in, and the rooms were at 50, in the high 40s, 50s degrees. We got the system up and running. I think by the time that school opened, the kids were coming in. I think we were at 64 on the classrooms on an average, or 62.
The temperatures increased faster today than they did when we had the other wings go out.
Yeah. So I think, if we get it up and running, by 4:30 in the morning, we'll be perfectly fine by the time the kids come in. Some of the other recovery times were due to some extreme cold weathers, which obviously allows us a longer comeback time. So I think the 4-hour window is fair, but I mean we can certainly get someone in there earlier if that's a comfort level that everybody has. I absolutely think it's a good idea.
I think what I'm saying maybe isn't coming through clearly. The window we have now isn't working. This has happened several times.
Correct.
And on the weekend, it happened. And I know we have Park District's in there, my kids have played basketball in there. It's still happening. What I'm saying is if we look at something and it's a couple of $1,000s to have someone go in there so that these kids can learn, that's money well spent in my mind to fix this problem. I really think we ought to not try to keep these windows of 4 or 5 hours. I think we ought to have someone inspecting every room in there, not just the 4 that are a problem, because a compressor can go out on the other end of the building. I mean, until we have some confidence and we've gotten through this cold weather season, I think we're setting ourselves up for another compressor problem or another whatever problem. At least if we can head it off, as you say, the building heats fast, maybe that person at 2 in the morning can solve it so the teachers don't notice it. Yeah, we had the problem, but we mitigated it. That's what I'm suggesting.
Scott, I would suggest moving forward while we're going through this, let's put somebody in there 24 hours, beginning Sunday night at midnight through Friday night at midnight. That'll cover that 5-day gamut. We have somebody in there over the weekend, obviously, but it's not as critical. But I think if we do midnight Sunday night to midnight Friday night, we've pretty much covered what would considerably be a 24-hour session on a 5-day work week.
Yep, no problem. Thank you.
Well, I guess unless there's more comment, but I'm going to make a motion because I think we ought to move forward with the field project. I understand we have to ask some questions, but I don't know that they're necessarily so tightly integrated that it would be warrant.
Well, before we do that, I just want to give everybody the opportunity. Is there any final comments on the field project?
Yeah, my comments are, and they've been consistent all along, is that I'm not in favor of borrowing money in order to complete this project. I don't think it's what the community wants. I think it goes against the spirit of the referendum. That has been consistent all along. These concerns that are happening now with Carpenter, at a minimum, I think we should take time to learn from these prior to moving forward with this project. So I'm going to vote no.
Okay. That being said, I'd like to take a motion regarding the field project. All right.
My name is my name is Kirk Michon. I'm a field school alumni. I graduated in 1967, raised 4 children that went to field school, and my wife's currently a teacher here. And until this gentleman just brought up the idea of the field school project, I was going to stand up and say, could we focus on the agenda item, which was the field school project. I'm sympathetic to what's happening at Carpenter, but that's not the action item that's on the agenda right now, and so I think that really ought to have its own time some other place on tonight's agenda. And I'm also, I've been following this, but I've been following it in the papers. So I might not have all the parties correct. And so I don't really understand Fannie and Howie's role, but I'm assuming that there were other design people involved in this. There's a lot of people involved when you put together a project like this. So when I hear them talk about the differences in design between Carpenter and Field, different contractors are going to do the work. I don't really see these things. I think the term mutually exclusive was used in another discussion tonight, and that seems to be the case here. I certainly don't think the field school project should be held up because of what's happening at Carpenter. Good to be concerned and to try to figure out what's happening, but there should be people held responsible, and it sounds like there are going to be different people working on the field school project. But one of the other things I think that bothers me is I hear, there's all this talk about the children at Carpenter don't deserve they're being moved around. I think there was some testing that was mentioned. And all I know is that for the last 12 years, every August and early September, same thing happens here. It's just a heat problem. So I really don't understand why it's any different, why this is the only school in the district that does not have an environment that's conducive to learning. It doesn't make any sense to me. And whether that means borrowing to take care of it, that's what you have to do. But these kids deserve just what every other child in this district gets. And when my wife comes home and says, we had to move kids around, we let them on early, that messes up their entire school year, when they miss 10 days. So I think they have an equal problem. Well, and that's about it. I mean, and again, I think the concerns about what's happening at Carpenter, those are legitimate, but it seems a little late in the game to be bringing that up to maybe hold up the field school project. I was an alderman in town. I understand the bidding process. I also understand the costs of delaying projects like this. If this goes till next year, it's probably not going to be in a $4.5 million project. It could very well be a $5 million project. So it's been bid. People understand what needs to be done. They're ready to go. They need to order parts. I think you need to act on it tonight, and I hope you say yes to it tonight. Thank you.
Another comment?
My name is Susan Shelby. I am a resident of Park Ridge. I have a third grader here at Field School. And I just want to reiterate the comments that the previous gentleman just made. My son, on hot days, has to rotate through the school of the different classrooms. We only have air conditioning on the third floor and in the library and in this gym. So on hot days, they're moving around just like the Carpenter kids are today. And they've been doing that for years. It's just not fair. If you buy a Mercedes and it doesn't run well and then you got a lemon, does that mean your friend isn't going to buy one when they go to buy a new car? You can't make a judgment on one bad system. I just hope that you give the field kids what they deserve. They deserve a classrooms that have air conditioning. Thank you.
No. Mike, yeah. That's okay.
Good evening. It's me again, Dr. Angela Tubo, Chair of the PTO Committee on Facilities. I spoke at the last meeting, and I thanked all of you for all the many votes that have brought us to this point for field. The design documents, the construction documents, going to bid, going to creative ways of borrowing money, restructuring debt to have no tax increase to the Park Ridge taxpayers to pay for these important construction projects. While I also sympathize with what's going on at Carpenter, it brings back memories of our August, our September, and early October here at Field, when my kids were rotated through and had to take map testing in 98-degree heat, missing school and not really getting a good, I have a kindergartner, that's how he started this welcome to Field school, it was kind of crummy. So anyway, my point is this, I've also been involved in a number of capital projects in my professional life. There are going to be issues. There are going to be issues with any project that you're going to implement, and they're going to have to be resolved. It's unfortunate that this Carpenter project seems to be have so many issues. However, I think we're failing to talk about the fact that heat and air conditioning were implemented successfully the same summer at Lincoln and at Franklin by these same folks. And while we are probably seeing some issues, nobody's here talking about those. So yes, there are issues at Carpenter, and there will be issues at Field. There were issues at Washington when it was implemented there, at Roosevelt. They need to get resolved. And so delaying this one more year, what will we gain from that? It'll cost us more. The kids have to suffer another year. And I'm not sure what else we'd accomplish. Are we going to go through the design documents more thoroughly and come up, which I've already been assured from Scott and Mr. Embers, they've been reviewed and re-reviewed with a fine-tooth comb. The design is as good as it can get at this point. If we delay a year, we're going to have the same design, and we're going to have to rebid. It'll cost us more. And what do we get? All we've done is waste a year. So I think there's one team that's resolving the issues experienced at Carpenter, and we should let them continue doing what they're doing. It should not have any impact whatsoever. It's a completely different design, system, equipment. There is no reason to consider a delay. So I urge you to continue moving forward just as you've done. We appreciate everything you've done to this point. You assured us back in September you were going to move forward with this, and you have. So we thank you in advance for your approval now.
Regarding the field HVAC contract, I'd like to take a motion.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, award the Field Elementary School 2014 mechanical improvements to Bergen Construction Corporation in the amount of $4,533,000.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'd like to take a vote starting on Vicky's side.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Thank you.
You have air conditioning.
Before Ed leaves, just to kind of point out, Ed's going to believe you're going to serve as the, I'm sorry? Yes. And I can tell you, just for anybody to hear this, I built a multi-million-dollar middle school with this man who was the project coordinator for that facility. I will not be here, but I can tell you, you will not work with a better individual. This gentleman gets in there, works with those contractors. There will not be any slip-ups. So Ed, I'm putting you on the notice here. But I'm telling you, having spent nearly 2 years in a construction project, never have I ever worked with a finer gentleman than you. And I wanted this board to hear that this evening. So thank you.
Our next item on the agenda is resolution number 1111. It's 4 ones. Becky?
Now that we've approved the project, we have to fund the project. And in your board packet tonight, you have 3 different appendices, 4, 5, and 6, that will execute the issuance of the bonds to fund this project, as well as the summer of 15 project and any other capital outlay projects that may be deemed necessary by the Board of Education. I sent that email today about the mechanics of a bond sale, and that reminding the board members that the proceeds of the bond sale are restricted to capital improvements such as mechanical upgrades, technology, roofing work, anything that would improve our facilities and or defined as capital improvement. They're restricted because of IRS regulations. If we wanted to designate a portion of that bond sale to be an infusion of cash to shore up our fund balance, then that portion of the bond sale would have to be taxable. And that's not the road that we've traveled preparing all the documents for the board this evening. And so to be in compliance with that, the monies that we typically designate into the operation and maintenance fund for ongoing capital improvements, such as carpet replacement. Scott has done a lot of work with door security and door handles to making sure that we have the most up-to-date security as far as opening and closing doors. Those type of expenditures will be made out of the capital improvements fund instead of the operation and maintenance fund, because we can use the bond proceeds for those. That transaction right there helps improve our cash flow because we've reduced our expenditures in the capital or the operation and maintenance fund. So the series of these resolutions that you're going to pass execute, number 1, the $8.6 million in general obligation limited tax school bonds. You will adopt a resolution providing for the issuance of not to exceed $800,000 of taxable general obligation refunding school bonds. So that's refunding a portion of our existing debt. And then the third resolution will establish an escrow account and an agreement for that $800,000. So when the payment of those bonds come due, it's paid out of the escrow account. And that's the series of resolutions that you're going to be asked. I've asked Ms. Hennessy to sit beside me, so if you ask technical questions, she can certainly respond to those. And that's what I'll do at this point, is turn it over for questions.
I guess maybe the one comment I would make is I think some of Becky's commentary comes out of a question that I raised on Friday, which was the question of, oh good, if the field project came in cheaper than we thought it was going to, surely we can use the balance of our bonds for shoring up the cash flow. And the answer was, well, no, we can't, because we have to spend it on capital improvements, to which my answer was, what? I thought these were working cash bonds, and therefore they were, freely used for any district purpose. And, Becky has explained and sent me chapter and verse from the IRS as to why although for state purposes, it is a working cash fund bond and can be used for anything. For federal taxability purposes, it cannot be used for just general purposes. And I guess I'm satisfied that that's the case. Part of my worry at the time on Friday had been that we saw last meeting a financial projection that didn't really look so hot as far as 2021. And so one of the things that Becky did on Friday and over the weekend and emailed around to board members today was a revised financial projection that did two things. One, it took into account the savings from the bus contract that we just approved. And the other thing it did was it assumed the payment of the O&M costs out of the capital fund as Becky just described. And with those two things, it does improve the cash flow situation. And so that has kind of moved me from a kind of crisis of confidence on Friday, where I was wondering whether approving Field and approving these bonds was such a good idea or not, to kind of back to where I was before, which is being able to vote for the Field project as I had hoped to be able to do so. And I think I'm comfortable with these bonds as well. We're still kind of nail biting as far as the financial projections. We're going to have to be awfully careful going forward.
Exactly.
But there does seem to be some ability to use the savings on the Field project to allow our capital fund to absorb the O&M costs at
Correct.
least. And that gives us some benefit to our cash flow. So just thought I would recap that story, if you will.
And Becky, thank you, John. The monies that would come out of the O&M fund for maintenance, therefore, can go back into the general fund, and we could utilize some bond monies to do some yearly maintenance. Is that what I'm understanding?
Correct.
So there generally is a savings there. And any security upgrades that Scott will begin over the course of next year will also be able to be taken out of this.
Correct.
Instead of taken out of the general fund.
Correct.
So although it is a state, right, where the state recognizes it, the federal does not recognize. Is that what I'm understanding? And I guess my question is then, what are the penalties if the funds are used, if there are penalties, or is it just prohibited by law?
It's prohibited by law.
So there's no opportunity to use, which I had in the back of my mind, these excess funds for one-to-one computing as an example.
Well, if you'll recall what I just said, it can be used for technology. So if the board so chose, and I had Elizabeth research this on Friday, one-to-one funding could come out of these funds because it is a capital improvement to the district.
It's capital improvement, so it doesn't have to be facility specific.
Yes, technically, yes.
It doesn't need to be nailed to the floor.
It doesn't need to be nailed to the building or be part of the building.
No mortar, no bricks and mortar.
Got it.
So that would preclude the computers being owned by the students. They would.
Correct.
Yes, they would have to be residing as property of the district.
Correct.
But if the district were paying for it.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yep.
don't get me wrong, that wasn't what I was, we haven't even gotten to that discussion yet, so, okay.
One of my thoughts as to why I wanted to refinance is just the belief personally and in my experience that there's a time when it's your fiduciary responsibility to borrow money when you have an opportunity at low interest rates. I couldn't help but notice you set a parameter of a maximum interest rate of 5, which is approaching where it's not prudent to borrow. As a board member, I am a little concerned giving wiggle room to say we can issue these at 5%. That's a lot higher than the 2.25% target. And so that's why I kind of wanted to ask a little bit about that.
Sure, that's the coupon rate.
Okay.
With interest rates as low as they are, investors are demanding premium bonds that have a 2, 3, 4, or 5 as a maximum coupon, yet the yield is much, much lower.
Okay.
So that when they go to trade those bonds, the 5% coupon stays and the yield moves around. If they want to sell them in the future, it just makes them more attractive. So that premium goes towards the proceeds of the bonds, reducing the par amount. So really your true interest costs we're estimating as of today is about 2.04%.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
And the intent is to sell tomorrow so that we capture that very low rate.
Please do.
I'm a little concerned, or not concerned, but confused, really. We have 3 years left on the Emerson bonds. And then I thought that the repayment on these bonds was to begin once those were paid off, at least according to the schedules that I had seen previously. Tell me again, how does this refunding bond issue therefore kick in, and how does that play against reducing the ostensibly $9 million left on the Emerson bonds?
Well, the goal is to issue these new bonds for field and other projects and keep the tax payments that the taxpayers are making about the same, okay? So we're going to be paying interest on the $8.6 million new money, but in order to keep the total payments the same to the taxpayers, we're refunding that same portion of the Emerson bonds and moving them out longer to the time after which the Emerson bonds are retired, so that taxpayers will not see an increase in the dollars they're currently paying. They'll remain about the same. And then, when the Emerson bonds are finally repaid, they'll see a drop in the taxes that they're paying about 4 or 5 years out.
So to be clear, even though we're borrowing an extra $800,000, the interest rates on those Emerson bonds must be so much higher than the interest rates on this, it's a positive offset. Is that the idea?
Well, what we're doing with those Emerson bonds is we are taking $800,000 of payments that would have come due in the next 3 years, and we're moving them out. So there's not really, even though the rates on these bonds are around 2% and the rates on those Emerson bonds were around 5%, we're not having savings because we're moving the payments out. We're going from a 5-year to a 7-year mortgage, for example.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so this is purely a very small restructuring to keep the payments the same to the taxpayers of the district.
Okay.
So you're keeping the payment the same, but we're just extending the period out.
Yes, on $800,000.
And we're also taking on
More debt.
$8.6 million for the debt at the same time.
Correct.
But if I remember correctly, Dan, didn't we say we were the payments will be a little bit lower than they were before, right? We said for like the average amount that it turns into to a taxpayer, it would be decreased a little bit, not as much as it could have been had we just not done this effort.
Correct.
So it's not that it's even going up, it is going down a little. It could have gone down a lot more, but we wouldn't have had the opportunity to do field. I just want to make sure I clearly understand that part, because that was germane to my decision.
The rate fluctuates based upon what our total assessed value is,
Right.
and we have absolutely no control over that, but the intent is, the
Right.
projections are.
Right, that's what we foresee is going to be the result. Perfect.
Any other questions or comments by the board? And if not, I'd like to have a motion on Resolution 1111.
And I would ask that you read from the yellow documents that were at your place setting tonight.
Oh.
Only because there's minor adjustments or corrections.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, adopt the attached resolution number 1111, providing for the issue of not to exceed $8,600,000 general obligation limited tax school bonds, Series 2014A of Community Consolidated School District number 64, Cook County, Illinois, for the purpose of increasing the working cash fund of the said school district and providing for the levy of a direct annual tax to pay the principal and interest on said bonds.
Second.
We'll start on Vicky's side.
Aye.
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 Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
6-1, Resolution 1111 passes. I direct your attention in the yellow packet, pretty far down, action item 14-02-7 regarding the refunding school bonds. Is there any discussion or comments regarding this particular issue? I think we've kind of gone over this whole process, but any comments? Not hearing any, I'd take a motion for this resolution.
I move that the Board of Education, Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge, Niles, Illinois, adopt the attached resolution number 1112, providing for the issue of not to exceed $800,000 taxable general obligation refunding school bonds, Series 2014B of Community Consolidated School District number 64, Cook County, Illinois, and for the purpose of refunding certain outstanding bonds of the said school district and providing for the levy of the direct annual tax sufficient to pay for the principal and interest of said on said bonds.
Second.
Second.
We'll start on Dan's side.
Nay.
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
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 6-1, resolution 1112 passes. And the final resolution, if I can find it in my yellow pages.
Follow the paper clips, Tony,
No,
on the left.
there we go. Again, this is the establishment of the escrow account, probably requires the least amount of discussion. Do I have any discussion required on this? And if none, I'll take a motion on this issue.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge, Niles, Illinois, adopt the attached resolution number 1113, authorizing and directing the execution of an escrow agreement in connection with the issue of not to exceed $800,000 taxable general obligation refunding school bonds, Series 2014B of Community Consolidated School District number 64, Cook County, Illinois.
Second.
Second.
Okay, we'll start on Vicky's side again.
Aye.
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 Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
6-1, all three resolutions passed. Okay. The next item would be the progress report and preliminary board goal student learning number 2, 21st century learning preliminary options for technology funding. Hello, Terry.
Good evening. Tonight, as we had mentioned in our last board meeting, I was going to be here to kind of give an update on where we stand in relation to our pilot with our Chromebooks and also offering some preliminary financial information for the board to review. This is all leading up to our presentation in relation to student learning goal number 2 on March 24th. So as we all know, we have been piloting a one-to-one on a smaller scale in grades 3 through 8 in all of our buildings with our Chromebooks. As of today, we have about a half to almost 2/3 of our students who are making their way through that one-to-one rotation. It's a multi-week extended period of time where students have a dedicated machine assigned to them to use in their coursework. It looks a little bit different in each of the buildings depending on how the rotations were set up, but every student in grades 3 through 8 by the end of the year will have had an experience with it. The main difference is that we are not allowing students to take that device home at this point. And also included in our plan, based on last year's proposal, was that we do have a 1-to-4 ratio of iPads in our K through 2 classrooms. And we will be providing some updated information on that as part of the plan on March 24th as well. So leading into our financial considerations, I provided the board some basic cost information just so you could begin to see some numbers associated with where this could potentially lead. At this point, the Board Advanced Technology Committee is not making a recommendation as to how we fund this. We are simply presenting options basic information to you and exploring options, and happy to address any questions, gather more information, and bring that back to the board for the March 24th presentation. Our hope is that we're able to address any questions preceding the March 24th meeting so that the board really has everything in their hands in order to be clear on the presentation and make a decision moving forward. If you look at the table provided, these are using this year's enrollment numbers. So these are our current 3rd through 8th grade classes. For simplicity's sake, I did break it down into what the totals would look like for addressing our 3 through 5 population and what our numbers would look like for our 7 through 8 population. I also, for the sake of the board's awareness, built in a 5% contingency in the event that we need to give out loaners, or also for our students who participate with our who qualify for free and reduced lunch. We want to make sure that we provide devices for them if, in fact, we go the route where parents might be providing the devices. For that situation, for those students, the district would need to incur that cost. I also did factor in the number of devices that we have currently in use that would still be viable solutions for us to carry forward for next year. So you can see the next net cost for establishing one-to-one in all grades 3 through 8 with that 5% contingency, subtracting out our existing devices, is roughly $772,000. The breakdown is similar as to what we provided last year when we purchased our Chromebooks. The Chromebook costs approximately $249 for the model that we get. There's also a management license that we pay per device, which allows our district to monitor and enroll that device in our system. It allows us to also filter and apply some monitoring devices for our both our technical side and also our teaching side. And then building in a case for that device as well, so approximately reaching a total of $300 per device.
Terry, I know that keyboards aren't included with these. Does that $249 price include a keyboard?
Yeah, the keyboard is integrated within the device. So it's not like an iPad where a keyboard would be separate. It's actually very similar to a laptop format where the keyboard is integrated with the whole device.
Oh, I thought we needed a separate keyboard for...
Nope, you do not require a separate keyboard for this device. One thing that I want to definitely make mention of, depending on who funds the cost of the device, there could be applicable sales tax. And I have a note, and Becky has a note, and I wanted to make sure that I mention that, because if it is purchased by the district, we do not incur sales tax. If it is purchased by a parent, they would pay the appropriate sales tax.
Illinois State tax?
Yes. So the committee met over its last 2 meetings to really begin looking at how could this be funded, what do these numbers kind of flesh out to be. And we really looked at a variety of options, either the district completely funding this initiative or having some type of joint funding format where, perhaps particular grade levels are funded by the district and other grade levels are funded by parents. What type of payments would we accept? Would it have to be all up front? If we were to allow graduated payment over time, what would the impact be on that scenario as well? And so based on our last Board Advanced Technology Committee meeting, we really felt it was important, and Scott Zimmerman brought this up as one of our board liaisons, it's really important that we ask the community these questions and get information from them if they're the ones who might in the end bear the burden of these costs. And so what was decided was to develop a communication plan, a communication strategy, so that our parents would be very well educated in this initiative in order to provide feedback about how they would be willing to support this initiative financially. So Bernadette Tram joined us on our committee meeting that night, and parents who were involved really felt it was important that we do some type of community outreach
to develop an awareness of what is one-to-one, what do we currently have going on in District 64, and how is technology really transforming the way we teach. And so through if you look at your places tonight, you have a flyer that Bernadette and I collaborated on to create, which was really designed to build awareness about Tech Talk Week that we would like to plan for the week of March 3rd, which aligns very well with daylight savings and aligning with the thought of springing ahead, and hopefully spring is in our future. And basically developing over a series of some clear communications over the course of a week, really where are we, what is the background behind this initiative, what are some key impacts that technology has on student learning, and culminating at the end of that week with a survey to be administered to parents to get that feedback. We would close that survey on March 12th, and then BAC's next meeting is scheduled for March 13th. So that would allow us enough time to prepare the plan for the presentation on March 24th and bring all of that data back to the board to enable our discussion and plan for hopefully a decision in the near future.
Terry, are there any options with the purchase? This tells me that there's an intention to purchase all the devices in one shot. Is there any other options available? Or are there any other options?
There are always options available. From the committee's perspective and the work that we've done this year in district at the board's request, we have targeted all grade levels 3 through 8. If the board felt that that might be too aggressive to achieve in 1 year, we can absolutely look at alternatives to addressing particular grade levels over a multi-year plan. The recommendation and the preferred idea is to get up to speed as fast as possible, to provide all students with the learning device that they need in relation to a variety of things, including curricular needs, addressing our Common Core standards, and having the technology available for our online testing. We're going to be part of that pilot testing in the spring, coming up relatively soon, and it's going to put our systems to the test and give us a good, preview of what's to come. And whether we go one-to-one or not, we will need to be purchasing more devices in order to not tie up every piece of technology equipment for a 12-week period.
Yeah,
so those are the considerations that went into that will go into the recommendation. However, there's always reality checks and financial considerations, and there are options.
And that's exactly it, is the financial aspect. Can we handle such a big bite all at once, and what effect does that have on the overall operating budget? And I mean, it's $700,000. It's quite a big bump. So, I'm going to be very interested in hearing suggestions on solutions for funding, because that's going to be somewhat critical.
Tony, one thing that I should state is, as being a witness to this meeting, the idea tonight wasn't to propose any particular thing. It was to give you an idea of what the scope is. And the committee really felt, we really do want the feedback before we're comfortable with any recommendation, because they were saying, and the other thing was, you'll see this Tech Talk Week, and the idea, and I might have stepped out when we talked about it earlier, was, these are like quick commercials that you can watch on your email. Maybe I thought was like a video, something that's narrated where you can see it, so it's quick for today's people who are on the go. And the idea was, surveying someone who is not somewhat up to speed on the subject is somewhat meaningless. But if you can make an effort to get them a little more educated on what one-to-one is, what we're doing, and so forth, the results would be more meaningful to us as we try to assess what's going on. So the thought was to put that together and then come to the board with that series of options, with a preferred option, so that it could gel a little bit and have a discussion. And then we could even, my guess is it might even take one more after that, where we're kind of talking. So it wasn't to cram anything down anyone's throat. But what was really interesting to me was there were some parents there, and the spectrum of responses was unique, because some were saying, who wouldn't put $300 towards their kids' education and do this? You know what I mean? That was one response. And part of what you want to get out of this survey is, what is the public's appetite for, you know what, I believe in what this is, I'd be willing to front some dollars in student fees for it, which would mean the burden on the district's end would be lesser. Other parents had said, yeah, but you know, if you got 3 kids, that's a big apple. And so that's why we said, let's inform the community, talk to the community, and try to get some feedback, because even the parents themselves kind of covered both ends of the spectrum pretty clear. And then there was a middle ground. So, I mean, we had like 3 parents there, and they kind of hit all 3 approaches quite nicely. So I think we're really going to need their input to try to come with any recommendation to the board from that committee.
Yeah, and I guess probably what I would add, in just having gone through some of this process already, what we're seeing right now is the overall bogey. What the time period for achieving that is, whether the district pays for it, whether parents pay for it, whether we both pay for it. If the parents pay for it, is it are they going to assume that they'll have their Chromebook for all 6 years? Will it be 2 bites at 3 years? Those things are still yet to come, and they're very much on the committee's radar screen. So when you get a recommendation, it will address all of those things. And there may be multiple, there may be a preferred option and other options so that the board can weigh in. But all of those are coming. We just don't have that yet. The other comment I would make is that if you remember from about a year ago, we were starting with a bogey that was kind of a grade K through 8 bogey of, 1-to-1 Chromebooks and 1-to-1 iPads. That's already been shaved down a little bit here. What you're looking at right now is a bogey that's only grades 3 through 8, because as the committee began to talk through, there was a sense that we were ready for 1-to-1 in grades 3 through 8. In grades K through 2, when we were looking at iPads, while we certainly want them, maybe we need them at different ratios in different grades, and we don't need to absolutely have 1-to-1. So there already is some shaving and some compromising going on within the committee, and that's probably worth pointing out as well.
And I think too, one of the things is that if you think about technology, it's an ongoing investment. And as John alluded to, there's, a longevity of a particular device. And at this point, we don't quite know the longevity of our Chromebooks. We, anticipate a solid 3 years, love to get out that 4th as well. Beyond that, you're really, in the world of technology, you're relying on the unknown. But if you think about this across multiple years, if you think that if we supplied every student with a device, just one scenario, if we supplied every kid a device in year 1, the only cost you would incur in year 2 is grade 3, if assuming grade 8 left with them. And if they don't, you actually just rotate those in for 3 years. So if you actually, spread this out over a 3-year plan, you are paying upfront in year 1 and getting the benefits of it for 3 years. But your costs are drastically reduced in years 2 and year 3. So those are considerations that the board really needs to look at, and that will be offered up to you on March 24th. But as many questions or scenarios that you can think of, that what other pieces of data do you need in order to feel that you're representing the community's interest in making this decision? And I think Scott had a great opportunity at BAC to give his input from his one board member's perspective of what he felt he really needed. And I hope that we're able to create a survey that will provide that data to you. But if there's any other information or key pieces that you're really interested in knowing or having some solid data on leading into the 24th, we'd love as a committee to have that ahead of time and work to give that to you as soon as possible. In looking at the time frame of all of this, if we are still discussing this in April, we're still probably in good shape. If we go beyond May, this probably will not be a doable initiative for the fall. Just in terms of preparing our teachers, informing the community, ordering, inventory, all of that preparation, it really is something that is time sensitive. And that's why we hope that we're coming to the board early enough with information to help expedite that decision-making process.
So just to your point about questions, and you all may have already thought of these and coming with the recommendation next month. But one is the plan for actually supporting all of the implementation at one time. That would certainly be something that's at the top in addition to what Tony's already brought up about the financials. So, our ability to actually support it, I believe, we're even a little behind the times in talking about hiring a webmaster for our website. So I just don't know the technology, infrastructure, and people that we have here to support this. And then the only other thing that I think we've talked about in the past was learning data, more quantifiable learning data, whether it's through the surveys that you're going to do, that's, from what I read, is going to be part of the 24th or next month. But I'm also interested in other sort of somewhat tangible learning efforts with one-to-ones with other districts. I think that's meaningful, even if it's not totally quantifiable. I would like to understand what other districts are doing since they've implemented one-to-one. And I'm sure, again, you guys have probably looked at those things.
One final thing for me. I would like to see, my concern with doing one-to-one all-in-one rollout like this, it depends upon the ability of the staff to work with these devices. And we had a report about 2 months ago that indicated 27% or 37% of our staff ranked themselves 1, 2, or 3 on that scale, if you recall. And there was going to be some effort to work on that group to get them up to 5 rather than work on all the 5s and get them up to 6. And my concern is that there will be classrooms where these will be purchased, distributed, and not used. And perhaps in one of the recommendations, there is some recommendation as to how that won't occur and how these devices will in fact be used and not collect dust.
One of the concerns that I've had from the get-go about a one-to-one initiative that I haven't heard addressed yet, and I asked a question, one of my first board meetings about this, was about the length of time that children would be on these devices during the daytime, given the fact that many of them will be doing homework on devices, will want during their free time to be playing video games on their devices, and they'll be on devices like this throughout the day. The cumulative amount of time that a child will be on an electronic device concerns me for a couple different reasons. The first reason is visual acuity, and younger children, are their eyes going to be damaged by that? Number two, the double-edged sword of pretty intense engagement. One of the things that I like about these devices is that they offer a very high engagement. I saw that when I visited the schools. My children have talked about it, and I really appreciate that. On the other hand, they're very engaging. So when the child is not using them, how can a teacher or a book compare? And does that not kind of create a mini addiction for a child when it comes to that? And so either they're going to have to use it a very significant part of the day, which creates one problem, or the other problem is they don't use them enough, and then they're not worthwhile, and then why do we need them one-to-one? So it's something that I'm wrestling with, and if there could be some data on that to either assuage some of my concerns about the visual piece or how we're going to make sure that the kids aren't using them too little or too much, I think is important for me.
Any other questions or concerns? Thank you, Terry. That next report's going to be very interesting. Yeah. Next item on the agenda is a discussion on the 2014-15 staffing report. This will be my third background into staffing, and I get more confused over it every year. So, Joel, if you can.
This is an annual process that we go through. And Joel is up here and Dr. Bender is up there to assist so that all three of us can participate in this presentation. But it's a document basically about budget preparation, so that we know how many staff to include in the budget draft that we'll bring you in May. One of the other questions Mr. Heidi asked me on Friday was, do the financial projections include all these staff members? And I said, well, Monday night's just a discussion, and once I understand how many staff members we may be adding, then we can do a quick calculation as to the effect in the financial projections. So that will be done. So that's one assurance I want to give you. We as an administrative team continue to review current staff and whether there are some efficiencies that we can find within that existing staff for reductions or modifications or changing the way we do current business. And if any of those changes come to the Board of Education for approval, it certainly will be done in accordance with collective bargaining agreements and the school code, so that we are compliant in what we present to you. And finally, these are discussion points tonight. There is no actual hiring of people tonight. That happens when we actually put them on a personnel report, and you see that on a monthly basis in the consent agenda. So we've broken it down into categories of enrollment changes, technology, administrative, and then student learning support. And the enrollment changes are based upon our methodology in predicting how many students we'll have next year. And based upon the rollover method, we think that we will be able to reduce 6 sections in grades 1 through 5. You had a revised document on your place setting. We increased a reduction for specials from 2 to 4 FTE today as we looked at that a little bit more closely. And then you'll see on that enrollment projection that was attached that all those little circles on that page are those sections that are currently within one of our class size guidelines, which is our methodology for adding additional staff. So if all of those came true, if all of those students showed up, we have 10 bubble sections that are in our document, and we think if all of those came true, that we would have to add at least 3 FTE to accommodate those sections of art, CFC, foreign language, music, and PE. So I guess I'd stop at that point and let the board ask questions, or we could go through this whole thing, and then you could ask questions about the whole document. It's at your pleasure.
Well, if I can. Last year, when I remember going through this, I remember that there was 10 positions on that bubble. And I remember asking the same question last year. Now, these are for budgetary purposes, and they won't be used unless, when we get into the 5th day issue and we go over and we have to add and you take them on. So my question is, last year, of the 10 positions that were included in the budget, how many of those 10 were actually utilized or filled?
I don't have the exact number in front of me at the moment, but pretty close to all of them. We brought back all of the teachers that were RIFT plus some. Like I said, I don't have that number sitting in front of you, but we went back and we RIFT about the same numbers this year, which I believe was 6, and then brought back all of those teachers for bubbles that had burst, for lack of a better term. And we had some additional openings that came, so we were probably, without the number sitting directly in front of me, we were probably close to 10, somewhere, my guess is at 8 or maybe a little higher.
So are you saying there was 8 new hires for this year over last year? Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. Well, yes and no. It all depends on how you want to look at it. And I'm not trying to be curt in that or funny about that. We RIFT teachers and we brought all of them back. So those are really staff neutral from one year to the other because they were on our payroll this year or this past year. They were let go based on enrollment, and then as the enrollment increased, we brought those same teachers back. So then anything beyond that was the staff increase from one year to the next year. But on paper, when you look at, because they're ripped and brought back, it looks like sometimes a significant gain depending on how you want to look at that. If
Well,
that makes sense.
that's exactly the question that I'm asking.
Yeah.
You know, I understand, let's say if you riff 20 and you brought those 20 back, to me that's budget neutral. I get that. But this would be 10 beyond that 20. So if you filled all these,
Well, not
are these
necessarily.
10 part of that 20?
Those 10, if we're riffing 6 and we have 10 bubbles and we brought all of those bubbles burst, we would hire back those 6 riff teachers. And then you would have an additional 4.
So in other words, this table does not predict that we're going to have 10 more classroom teachers next year than we have this year.
Correct.
What it's predicting is that in March, we'll riff 10 people. 6 of them will be classroom teachers, 4 of them will be specials teachers. And if the class sizes don't come back, they won't come back. But you're putting in the budget the possibility that you've riffed 10, you might bring back 13. So if everything in the budget were to come to pass, you'd be plus 3. Is that
Correct.
And again, for budgeting purposes, I factor in 55,000, understanding that we'll hire a few that are under that and a few that are over that. But the average would be 55 staff member.
And on the flip side of this, we have 2 administrative positions.
Well, on that first page, we have the technology department, and that includes the new position for the webmaster / district technologist, and we're estimating that will be a 12-month position and a salary of $60,000.
That's a new position.
That's a new position.
Right. And on the flip side, the administrative, those 2 positions, those are not new positions, correct?
One is a new position, and one is a title change and a reporting change. So the new position is the Assistant Director of Special Education / Pupil Services, and we're estimating that that's an 11-month position. Type 75 is required, and that it would be an estimated base salary of $90,000.
I have a laundry list in this section. I don't know if we want to start now, Tony, or but
Yeah.
I have a whole bunch of questions.
Well, you know, I guess maybe the first question would be, you're kind of rattling off, just in a matter-of-fact way, what's in the staffing plan. To me, the first question for everything but the first table. The first table is an pure operation of our class size policy. Unless we wish to change our class size policy, the stuff in the first table is going to happen. The rest of this is all asks. And so, to me, the first question would be, make your pitch. Why do you want these positions, and why is it important for us to have these?
Defer to Mr. Martin for that.
So I'm going to make 2 pitches here, or a pitch with a caveat. The caveat is the fact of saying to you that we are constantly and currently looking at the fact of where we can save and eliminate or consolidate. I think what we're trying to do now, we're in the discussions in some of our departments, is looking at the fact of talking with people within those departments on what those changes may look like and what are the impact of those, so that if any changes we bring forth to the board would be fully vented, and I'm looking over at Lori because I know she's had some discussions in looking at this, so that we would have those fully, we would understand all of the ramifications and would have the full support of those who it might impact. So I'm saying that in the fact that we are currently looking at that and have some ideas of that moving forward. To that, I guess I'll go down the list and then maybe take them one at a time, and you guys can ask questions or however you want to do it. The Webmaster District Technologist position, that one to me seems to be the fact, we look at the fact that we need somebody to look at our webpage on a continual basis and make sure that we have current updated data so we can continually be transparent to our community and we can provide the information on an up-to-date basis, as I think the board and our administration and I think our staff would like. We view that as a 0.5 position overall. The part of that then would also be with the district technologist is in how it's kind of as you see the Webmaster District Technologist, it's a 1.0, but how we're kind of viewing it is in the sense that additionally, and I'm saying what 5 it could be 6 to, I don't, whatever the case may be, but this person would also work to help support the growing technology needs within the buildings, the ESC, the district over at Jefferson, and help support in the needs throughout the rest of the district. What we're finding currently is, and Terry, I could defer, and if I get this wrong, I'm sure she'll correct me, or Allison sitting behind me, is that we're spread thin, that we've added devices over the last 4 or 5 years, and we have not added any additional support. And what we're finding is our people are in that department are being spread thin, trying to meet the continual needs and the growth of technology within the district. Okay. So that's what we're looking at in that one, and I think we feel very strongly that this would be something that would be of great benefit to the district. Should I keep going?
I'm okay with that.
Okay. The Assistant Director of Special Education Pupil Services, and Mr. Even had to leave, otherwise I would kind of ask him to help speak with me on this, but I think what we're seeing on this is, for lack of a better term, Jim can't do it all by himself. He's trying really hard, and for Jim to be out in the buildings and do everything that he needs to do, needs to be able to do to be fully informed and supportive of his staff is growing increasingly harder, and he's finding more and more difficult to do his job. And since I believe it has increased not only, and I think if Jim were here, I think he would say that initially when we took on the administrative role of the METSEP, that they did not add or added very little administrative support, and Jim took that on personally, a great chunk of that, and he's finding it very difficult to do everything to do it well. And I think that as the needs in our special education department grow, and as the need for administrators to be more a part of in the classroom observing and supporting the staff, being at the meetings, that is all time consuming, and that his time is growing, for lack of a better, he's being spread thinner and thinner, and he's finding it, again, just more difficult to meet the administrative needs within that department.
So, we even toyed with the idea of adding another assistant principal, which would make all of our schools have one. It's very difficult to justify a full-time assistant in a building of 300 plus kids. I understand that, and we did not bring that forward. But one of the reasons we brought this forward is just what we've seen this year in not only the increased issues that we deal with special education families, but all the things that have come along with that has just taken its toll, truly has taken its toll on Jim. And, for that reason, we feel strongly that whoever sits in that chair moving forward has got to have some help. The issues in pupil services have grown. The issues with special ed, all this board is aware of the issues we've dealt with this year. It is just impossible for him at that level to handle it alone. So is it, and I actually appreciate that very much, because I've sort of seen Jim, in action, and I guess I wonder whether this is a junior position to Jim's position. It is. You're shaking your head. So this position will report to Jim, or
yes,
to Jim's predecessor?
Yes, it would be working a Type
Or
75 administrative position that would answer to Jim.
Okay.
That would be part of the pupil services special ed
And
department.
Jim's retiring at the end of this year?
Correct.
Right, so the idea was that you'd have Jim's predecessor in this role both start in the fall. Is that kind of the thought? I mean, would it make...
July and August for the new one.
So, I mean, I just wonder, would it make, if I was the person who's taking up that new role, would it make sense to wait to hire the person to be reporting to that person so they could hire them themselves and they'd be able to figure out the roles and the type of person they want in that position, rather than you hire them both at the same time and they didn't have any influence in any in the hiring of the person who's going to be reporting to them, and they might not have the right characteristics for that role. So I wonder if there's actually an advantage to waiting on filling that role.
It's a good point, Dan, and I would say definitely there would be an advantage to looking at the fact of posting and hiring the position after July. I would maybe, if the board so wants to move forward, I would also maybe talk with Jim about the pros and cons of that, but I think it's a good point.
You know,
Go ahead. And this particular role, one of the justifications you just mentioned was that when METSEP went away, there were a lot of administrative duties that he's taken on. So my question would be, is this not more of an administrative assistant position? If those are the challenges he faces, could we, instead of hiring a professional level individual, could we not find an assistant to take some of the easier tasks or the lower level tasks so that Jim could focus on
Right.
or his successor could focus?
Jim has taken on more administrative as far as the paperwork component, but the other component that has become very critical in Jim's job is the leading of the different various groups, such as the OT, PTs, social workers, speech paths, things of this nature that fall under the Pupil Services Special Ed Department. He organizes the meetings. He attends all those meetings. He has taken great leadership in that and trying to provide a cohesive guidance within the department, and so that we're all moving in the same direction, and so that we're getting the same message. And that's the part that Jim, being the lead in that, also Jim has been extremely proactive in being a leader that's in the classroom, observing, working with the teachers, attending the IEP meetings, going to staff meetings and presenting. It's all of these duties that are spreading thin and making it hard for him to be able to do what he needs to do. I think the part that we find is Jim is spending a great deal of nights and weekends doing the paperwork part because he's in so many of these type of things during the day. And so while I don't think Jim would ever turn down any additional help, I think if Jim were here to tell you, I think he would say my greatest need is having somebody else who can split that burden, who can take some of those type 75, even some of the evaluation components that he does. Somebody who can be the lead, set up agendas, oversee and run some of these, for lack of a better term, maybe mini departments within his department would be a great service to him.
Yeah, services probably couldn't do that.
Correct.
Yeah, but my question is more one of, I understand Jim is spending time doing those things. He could be, could someone alleviate those and he could spend time then on the things that Jen, and you're saying that those things, that the amount of times he saves in administrative work, there's still too much to do on the other end, and so therefore that wouldn't cover the delta.
Well, Joel mentioned an interesting point about the evaluations, because really I think of anybody in my office, he probably does more evaluations probably than, I know he does even more than I do, and from an administrative standpoint, that's certainly a lot, and that's a type 75 responsibility. That just in and of itself is just a huge, especially with the evaluations changing, and we're looking at establishing merit with that. It's a big deal.
Well, that being said, I'm wondering if Jim's position is becoming a catch-all with the incorporation of MSEP. His burden has seemingly increased, and this is an operational question. I don't know the answer to this, but I'm wondering, can some of the work that has been pushed down his pipeline be filtered off into other areas to lighten the load in that department? And I don't know how things are divvied up or what
and again,
areas.
Unfortunately, Jim is not here to think, but we did have conversations, and I will just say from those conversations, Jim thought this was the best option. And so again, if you asked me to go back and talk to Jim about it, I would gladly do that. But in the initial conversations of what we thought would be of the greatest support to him and to whomever fills Jim's shoes moving forward, this is what we, and Jim was supportive. The Director of Innovative Learning and Technology would be replacing the current Director of Technology, Terry, who we will miss greatly, and who's done a tremendous job. And what we would like or do is recategorize this, slightly change, bringing this role into the curriculum department and working directly with Dr. Hinton. One of the things that we've seen that we have greatly benefited from, and it feels weird talking with the two of them on each side of me here, is the fact that they work so well together that they have very much a very common understanding of curriculum, and they're working towards the same goal. And I think moving forward, as you have seen through many of the presentations between Terry and with Dr. Hinton, that technology more and more is about curriculum integration and is about supporting and engagement within the classroom. And I think one of the things that we definitely want to make sure is that moving forward that we continue this one vision between our technology and curriculum department. And we think this, having this person work directly with Lori is going to ensure and make this a good process and a seamless transition for whoever tries to replace Dr. Bresnahan.
So this isn't a new position then?
No, it's not a new position. It's simply retitling and putting this under Lori's department.
You know, this, well, not to extend the meeting, this is one I, at least as a board member, not to get into the weeds, I kind of question, given what we want to do in the next year or two. The reason I question it is I have Terry's job in the private sector, and it is incredibly important that the person making these decisions have an independent voice. No disrespect to Lori. And it seems to me if we're going to spend this much money on technology, and if we're going to spend this much of an effort for one-to-one, and it's so important, the ability to go directly to the superintendent and to be a voice at the table and not to, you know, regardless whoever our bosses, we're trying to do what they want. And to have two independent approaches to curriculum and enhancing curriculum through technology, at least over the next few years, seems pretty important. You know, through the years I've seen the CFO is where the IT should go, or the operations director, and now it's marketing. But enlightened companies always come back to give them a seat at the table if technology is a critical differentiator in what your core mission is. So I guess this is one I really kind of scratched my head with at this juncture. I'm not saying ultimately that doesn't make sense to synthesize it, but I would think collaboration could achieve what we want to achieve. I would think we would want to have an independent voice with the initiatives we're going through forward. So it was just one that struck me. I'm not going to tell you to do how to do your business. It just, that threw me for a loop because it just didn't seem like with what's coming up.
And I will say, to Terry's credit, Terry brought up the similar, pretty almost verbatim, about the fact of making sure that the individual has a seat at the table. And I will say that our thought process is not to remove that person from our administrative team or to not allow them a seat at the table.
Understood, but study after study has kind of shown you work for your boss, right? And this is who you want to impress. And I think that Lori is going to come at it very differently than Terry is in terms of it. And I think the two of them being colleagues or peers has value. And I just wanted to at least make that statement. And if, you know,
let me add something to that. When I arrived at District 64, Terry was already in place working with Diane Betts. This was a new piece for me. I didn't understand that, as I was not involved in any transition of that when I came here. So I pulled Terry out of that, and Terry reported, and still does, reports directly to me. It took me a while, again, because there was no transition, to figure out what the original relationship was between what the intent was with technology and the relationship with, to curriculum. Now, based on that, I know this board is investing a lot of dollars in transition for the new superintendent, which is a wonderful thing. New superintendent needs to have a voice.
Yes.
And I would certainly suggest on these particular levels that process happen so that new superintendent has a say. I didn't have that say. I would have been much better off had I been involved in that piece, because my knowledge level with the relationship with technology and curriculum would have been far better and brighter than it was. That was, it was a problem. It's hindsight. I suggest that moving forward, that whenever these pieces come together, this team will get involved with this new soup and they will hash these things out. And so maybe that's something that they do internally, but that voice needs to be at the table, not mine. It needs to be the new ones.
And to that point, Dr. Bender brought that up a while back to us, and we have been in contact with Dr. Hines, who will be coming to talk to us specifically about this. We've already had that date set.
Okay.
Thank you, Phil.
Moving to the student learning support, the first one, the addition of one full-time FTE TPI or English learner teacher is based on the increasing growth of population within our district. The early childhood occupational therapist, the .2 position, is due to an increased time, as Jim has said here, on the diagnostics team. So this would be an increase in percent of one of our current employees.
Joel, can I go back for one, the English learner teacher?
Yes.
You said that there's been growth in English learner population. Do we have a metric to show, has it gone from 2% to 12%, or?
I wish Jim was here. We do have a number increased, but I don't. Do you know? Okay. And we can get that for you, Tony. I do know that there was a number and that Jim does talk about a specific number, and I apologize that I don't have that with me.
For instance, how are those folks handled now versus at what percent increase does it justify this position? That's why I asked this. Yeah.
Again, I would like to get that information with you specifically for Jim, because without him being here, my fear is that I would say something that would be incorrect on that number and how, but I could definitely get that for the board.
All right, that'd be great. Thanks.
The early childhood psychologist, early childhood again, this is a .1 position, adding from somebody who is part-time, moving them up from, I believe it's a .5 to a .6 to increase for additional, again, diagnostic team. The developmental kindergarten teacher would be a new position at the early childhood as the population is increased and allow for greater support to prepare these students for first grade. Lori, I don't know if you want to say anything to that one or not. Okay. And then our math school intervention teachers, these would be, when it's 2.0, this would be one for each middle school. Specifically, would be part of the RTI support that we provide. We currently have staff in place at both middle schools, full-time staff who support reading, but we do not have anybody specifically designated to support the areas of math. And one of the issues that we find, not only based on scheduling issues, but just as and Lori, again, you can tell me if I have this part wrong, I think the middle school, as the math curriculum becomes more accelerated and a little more condensed through the levels of middle school, we find that our students in Tier 1 or the core, oftentimes we have students who are struggling, and being able to provide that intense support with scientifically based programs becomes difficult for us to make sure that these students get the opportunities to grow in the area of math, and that we can keep them from needing additional support or falling through the cracks or falling into something that might end up needing special ed support. And our teachers specifically and administrators at the middle school feel that if we had math intervention teachers who could be specifically there to provide that small group intervention support, we could really do a lot of work to move those students forward and support them back in the core, if that makes, hopefully I'm explaining that correctly.
So we don't have anyone doing that right now at Emerson or Lincoln?
We have math teachers who, not consistently, but do provide some math intervention classes through the year, but not the entire year and not for each grade level throughout the entire year.
We do have that at other schools?
Lori? We do not.
One of the things that we talked about in our October board report is why do we see so much reduction in the percentage of students who aren't meeting standards in the area of literacy, but we see kids who sort of persist in struggling in the area of math. And one of the hypotheses that we have about that is students not having access to sort of a systems level math support like they do in terms of literacy. So our thought was to provide our middle school students with that kind of intensive support. At the elementary schools, it's happening through classroom level differentiation. That becomes more challenging at the middle school level. We do offer a Math Connects program, but it's only one trimester during the school year. It's not closing the gap for some of our kids who are struggling.
Lori, was the intention of the new math curriculum to help differentiate? And are we finding that you need differentiation even beyond what the new program offers?
You know, there are some nice differentiation components within the math program. One of the things that is a big part of the math program that we've talked about a lot at the board table is formative assessment and really diagnosing where your kids are so that you can support their instruction in small groups. We talked about that a lot at the last curriculum cow. Certainly there are times when students are so discrepant from their peers that the level of intensive differentiation could best be supported in a separate class. And that would be who this program would be for.
I guess that brings in the computer issue, right? So if we have this program which provides some differentiation, computers, a one-to-one initiative certainly will, I've seen it in action, certainly will provide some differentiation. So does that obviate this position, or this position still becomes necessary in spite of all these other advances?
You know, it's our proposal that this particular position is still needed. We would love to work ourselves out of that job. You know, I think it will be interesting to see the impact that technology has on differentiation. I would anticipate that I would support that theory, that at some point the amount of differentiation that we're able to accomplish through technology closes those gaps for kids, so we don't need separate support classes.
Gotcha.
You know, normally I'm a little suspicious of the concept of an initiative can translate directly into scores or grades. I find that to be a thin connection at best. This strikes me, though, as something that maybe is as a candidate for this, where we would say, look, these middle school math intervention, we've never had it before, we think it would make a difference. Would this be a candidate to say, if we don't see improvements in scores at a certain level where we're trying to achieve this, that in 2 years these positions go away? Mm-hmm. Because it seems to me what we're really trying to do is really focus and target on something, and although I never want to tie initiatives directly to score results because I don't want to teach to the test, this isn't teaching to the test, this is intervention. I mean, is that something you guys would be comfortable saying, I'm willing to put a time limit on this, and if that doesn't happen, not that I'm saying I endorse this right now, I still need to think about it, but would this be, am I right in my assumption, this
Sure.
would be a candidate for the one time you might want to do it?
Sure, we could use our MAP scores to get a baseline and write a SMART goal, and see what happens from there.
And Scott, what you're doing in this instance is you're wanting to measure the capacity of learning. Yeah. So you're wanting to see if by these positions, does that learning increase? Right. That kind of takes the numerical value out of it, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but I think that's a good motion that you want to look at, because that's what we want to see is if learning increases because of those positions.
So is that all the position?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So at 11.3, right, new positions, is that right? Do I have that right? Between the net on the bubble and all of that, plus these. Am I looking at that right?
I might be tempted to call it 6.3, because what I might do is I might detach the first table from everything else.
Right, so you would...
Because unless you're going to change your class size policy, you can't do anything about what's in the first table. Mm-hmm. Whereas all the other tables are what I would say asks of the board, things the board does not have to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that would be correct, yeah. That's fair.
You know, I'll offer a little comment and then a slightly more substantive comment. My little comment would be, I think this has been a good discussion. I think for the next board meeting, if we're scheduled to approve this, I wouldn't mind seeing a beefier memo that includes some of the rationale for this. I'm thinking I'd kind of like to see at least a paragraph on each ask, you know, that summarizes why this is important. To the extent you have metrics on things like the English language learners, put them in the memo stuff like that. It's nice to have things in writing and not just orally. So that's my little comment. My bigger comment is, this puts me in a dilemma that, happens quite a bit. I feel like you have a good reason for each and every one of these positions that you've proposed. They all sound good. They all sound important. But I don't think I can give you, 6.3 additional FTEs with no offsets or anything like that. And kind of for two things I keep track of. One is I'm, fixated on that 2021 financial projection. And as I understand it, none of those 6.3 new positions are in that projection right now. So, a projection that is kind of on the edge will get worse if we approve all 6.3 of these. The cost of the 6.3, as I read it, is just short of $400,000 per year every year, which actually probably makes this a bigger ask than the one-to-one computing would be if the district were to pay for it all. So this is big. And so that's one thing I focus on. The other thing I focus on is kind of aside from the projection. I'm concerned that we have kind of a slow creep of increasing the number of FTEs per child in our district. Our enrollment stays pretty much flat, yet the number of adults we have to teach that same number of kids increases. That bugs me a little bit, separate and apart from just the pure financial projection. So either way, I've got a real hard time just greenlighting 6.3 all new positions. My suggestion would be, and I'm not dismissing them completely out of hand, I want to think about all of them, but my suggestion would be it would be a lot easier to swallow if something were being traded for it. I would much rather see you reallocate your resources than just simply ask for more resources. So I don't know if that means finding something else that once was important and is now useful but not that useful and eliminating that. Whether perhaps we ought to take a one child per class size increase to pay for these. I don't know if this is that important, but I'd like you to think in terms of those terms, because it's really easy to say, needs have increased, we need more. If you're forced to be put to the test of would you give anything up for these, that would be a lot more meaningful to me as a board member. If I know you need that assistant director for special education so badly that you'd be willing to give up your LRC assistants to get that person, that really means something to me. So that's what I would urge you to start thinking about.
And I would just go back to some of the opening comments that I made when we started this conversation, that the administration is still looking at those, and we anticipate bringing back various positions that we will recommend a reduction in. We just haven't finalized all of that yet. So, and we weren't prepared to talk about that. But I think when we come back on March 24th, you will see that added to this memorandum so that you will see some offsetting costs.
I'd like to echo John's thoughts there. I need a better description on many of these roles. Just for instance, developmental kindergarten teacher, I'm not taking a lot away from that description there, so I need more there. I also agree with John in part in the sense that, what are you willing to take away? Because it seems like every year we're adding, and the cost per child is going up, and other things aren't going up in line with it as far as our performance, and that concerns me. But one thing that I don't necessarily agree with John on is increasing the class sizes per teacher. That is not something that I would be in favor of. I'm in favor of reducing other things, but if it results in increasing class size, I wouldn't want to see that. Now, again, that's just one board member's opinion, but if you are going to present us with some options, I'd like at least the options that I could look at, some way to be able to remove that piece, like somehow have it separate, because I don't like that idea, but everything else was good.
And Dan, let me clarify. I'm not suggesting that I would necessarily favor that either.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is, to me, I'd keep all the options open, but I think you need to be thinking that in order to get the bulk of this, that you need to be thinking reallocation, not addition.
You know, I started this tonight with the question, trying to understand the RIFs versus the hires and understanding the delta, because as John has so well said, I am concerned about this population creep as well. That being said, I'm wondering if this new world order demands thinking outside the box. Job descriptions perhaps should change, they should morph, they should include more, things need to be different. And perhaps positions can do more with less. I mean, the whole thing needs to be looked at. You can add people in, but I think the whole schematic needs to be perhaps looked at. Not an easy task, but that perhaps needs to be done. That being said, outside the box also includes altering the class size policy. Now, we have a very rigid policy, and we had a report last year comparing our policy to other districts, comparable districts. And there's some flexibility in those districts. It's not as rigid. And that might be worth looking at. I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm saying it might be worth something to look at. I don't even know if that would be any benefit to us. But that's just one example of perhaps thinking outside the box.
Tony, just to kind of give you an idea, when you talk in class size, the process that we use is as soon as the class as a whole goes over 1, we immediately jump to the next level, which reduces the class sizes from that point significantly. If you looked at the process, and I'm just throwing this out there, but if you looked at the process, and let's say, for example, you have 3 sections, instead of jumping at 1 section, you wait till each section jumps by 1, then you jump. It's a process. You're still looking at class size, you just don't jump as quick. Now, with that, follow me through on this, with that kind of thinking, I had Becky take a look at this and said, what would that do to this if that were the process? And I'm just entertaining that. You would have no bubbles. You would have no bubbles? You would have no bubbles. Eventually, you could, because our population tends to jump a little bit over the summer. It also drops a little bit. But it's a process. It's not changing class size. It's the process by which you get to that size. The reason I mention that is because if you go through and look at a lot of the class sizes that don't have bubbles, they're well below the numbers. It's something to think about. And the reason I say that, maybe you don't want to right now, but at some point in time, reality will kick in. And you will have to make some adjustments because the cash flow, the cash on hand will not be there. Whether it's this year, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, somewhere along the line, that decision will be made. And when you have to make those kinds of reductions, it always results around people. But this is just a process piece. So it's just worth just thinking about. It's not changing the class size, it's changing the process by which you get there.
So Dr. Bender, you and I talked about that a little bit in the past, and just so I fully understand it. So if you look at the kindergarten class on this sheet then, so are you saying that you could have, if there's, we'll take field where there's 5 sections, are you saying potentially that there could be one section with 23 students and the rest would have 22 under that policy? So there would be like one section.
That is correct.
So there'd be one section where we should exceed our standard.
Right now, if one section goes over, you add a teacher.
But you're saying under this new plan, there'd be one classroom, one section where it would exceed, the rest wouldn't. Where
Could happen.
You'd have 23 students, all the
It could
rest would have
start there.
22.
Yeah, it could start there.
So why wouldn't we do what he's suggesting? I mean, it sounds very logical.
Well, it's because you'd have a classroom with one more student than we've agreed to.
Potentially, you'd have 4 out of 5 classrooms with
Yeah.
one more
You could,
student
yes.
than you had agreed to.
Yeah.
You know, it's, and I know actually this was a proposal on, in fact, I think the board did this in the run-up to the 2007 referendum as one of its budget-cutting ideas. And it saved some money, and it was one of those budget cuts that was then reversed after the referendum, going back to the old rules. So, you know, it's certainly something that one could do. One could also turn the class size goals into targets rather than absolute maximums and let the administration have more say. I'm not sure whether they want that. There's some comfort in having absolute rules.
I mean, the practice up to this point has been, I guess, what I would refer to as absolute, but it's very expensive.
Yep.
And if the board chooses to continue that route, that's fine. Just understand at some point in time, it may be a different board that will be strapped with having to deal with this. It's just something just to think about.
Any other questions on this issue? And if not, we'll, thank you. We'll move forward to the consent agenda.
Tony, if you would entertain a question before the consent agenda, I think it might be useful to reprise one of the questions that I asked Becky over the weekend on the consent agenda, which was about the monthly financial report. And I looked at the monthly financial report and I noticed that our expenses are pacing a bit faster this year than they were at this time last year. And our revenues are pacing a bit slower at this time this year than they were at this time last year. And my question to Becky, and I'll ask it again so the other board members can hear the answer, was, do you have any concern that that means that either our revenue will undershoot for the year or that our expenditures will be over budget for the year? And if, Becky, if you wouldn't mind giving the board the answer you gave me.
I said I wasn't concerned about the expenditures, although they may be tracking slightly ahead than the prior year. January had 3 peg checks, and I think it was in March last year that we ended up with 3. So that's a variance right there. On the revenue side, I think we're tracking well in all areas, except for our TIF payment, which we typically receive in December. It's the end of February, and we have not received it. Dr. Bender and I have had multiple conversations with the city of Park Ridge concerning the delay of the payment, and they have some concerns about staff turnover and the ability to locate records. And we continue to have strong conversations. In fact, I think they get a little bit more heated every time we visit with them. We will be ratcheting up those conversations and possibly addressing a letter to either the city manager and or the mayor, depending what would be appropriate.
Maybe we can hire those security guys to make a visit. The latest issue that we dealt with the city manager was the issue of the kids. There was some issues with some kids being counted twice. There was some issues with the number of kids that went in and out of the TIF areas, and I think we've got that corrected. Becky, is that right?
We have given them the information several times. So.
It seems curious to me that there's non-payment for TIF when just a few short months ago there was some interesting discussions in the paper about the TIF, and now kind of getting the runaround the way it sounds.
And I guess my reaction to all of this, if there are some legitimate calculation issues that need to be worked through, that's all well and good, but I really would not like to see this payment come in after the end of the fiscal year. And to the extent that you feel you're getting the runaround, I quite frankly would send them a demand letter, tell them they have 30 days to pay, and if they don't pay, you sue them. The city owes us money the way they owe their bondholders money. This is not like state aid payments where if it doesn't get appropriated, we just lose. This is another unit of local government that we have a contract with them. We should expect them to honor their contract, period.
I did check with 207 over the weekend, and their business manager did respond to me that they have not received their payment either. So they haven't singled out District 64.
That doesn't provide me any comfort.
No, I didn't think it would.
The other question I might have is, do we need to get in front of this and craft the message about what's going to occur if this delays longer? Meaning, do we need to get a press release out, say we're outstanding? I mean, do we want to control this message as opposed to a bunch of aldermen in the paper painting it differently? Because it really is a pretty simple matter of them not paying it. And I defer to Bernadette on this and you guys, but I wouldn't be afraid also of just going right into the press and saying, we're waiting on a bill, to apply a little pressure. I mean, I want to be friendly to our neighbors in the city. I certainly don't want to cause any problems, but if we are getting the runaround actually, then I just assume, take a more heavy-handed approach.
There have been a lot of issues, having had numerous discussions with the city finance person and the city manager. They have alluded all these problems, and I don't doubt those problems exist. They've had a huge turnover. They're digging through records trying to find things. Not our problem. We have an agreement with the city. I agree, John. I think it's time to, and Becky and I talked about it today, that it's time to get the letter moving, and we're ready for the money. We've been patient enough. We've worked through their little minor issues. Now it's time to put it to the test.
Becky, you said that we normally receive the money at a such and such date. What does our contract stipulate?
That it's paid in December.
It's due in December.
Paid in by December 31st?
I think it's December 15th, actually.
December 15th?
I guess the other analogy I would make is we just sent a bunch of our own taxpayers to to collection agencies for non-payment of bills. Don't know why we should treat the city of Park Ridge any differently.
I thought I was the only militant one.
I like the idea. It's about 600,000. Is that about right?
That's what we received last year.
Yep. Okay.
So you will be at, I would recommend the caring politician in me is reaching out and saying, letting them know that the board has concern over their non-payment and what is the timeline with which we can expect this. We're going to hold them to that, and that timeline simply would be 3 weeks, certainly no more than 4 weeks. What timeline do you anticipate? Now, John, you mentioned within this fiscal year, so that would mean before the end of the school term, right?
Yeah, although I guess I would say, I want them to act quickly enough so that if we need to sue them to get the money, that we get the lawsuit resolved by June 30th and get our money. I don't want them dragging us into May or June and then telling us they're not going to pay or, giving us the runaround that long. I don't understand. It's February. I don't understand why this is so difficult. If in my mind, 30 days ought to do it.
Dr. Bender and I will have a conversation with them tomorrow morning.
Yeah,
So
have this resolved
April
by
1st.
the next board meeting. Yep.
Okay. So we have a consent agenda, and I'll need a motion.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the consent agenda February 24, 2014, which includes the personnel report, bills, payrolls, and benefits, approval of financial update for the period ending January 31, 2014, approval of policies from Press Issue 82, acceptance of donation, and destruction of audio closed minutes.
Second. Jason. Let's start on Dan's side.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
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 7-0, consent passed. Next item, approval of minutes.
You want a motion?
Well, any discussion, any changes? Anybody perceive any errors? And if there is none, I would take a motion.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the minutes from the special board meetings on January 24, 2014, January 30, 2014, and February 10, 2014. Closed session meetings on January 15, 2014, January 24, 2014, January 28, 2014, and February 10, 2014. Committee of the Whole Curriculum Minutes on January 30, 2014, and Committee of the Whole Finance Minutes on February 10, 2014, and regular board meeting on January 28, 2014.
Second.
Why don't we start on Vicky's side?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Did I vote for that? Did I jump you?
Board member liaison report, Dr. Bender.
We've heard a lot from the Board Advanced Technology Committee. We probably
I think it's good
to do that. That's great. Vicki, you want to just give a little roundup this morning, the PTO presidents?
We had a great meeting. A lot of the same people are still here, and we talked about the technology week. And believe it or not, some people didn't even know what one-to-one was. So she's going to add a ticket underneath the website just to say what one-to-one is. So I think it's great. And we also talked about the new website. So it was a really nice interactive meeting.
Elf, I don't know, Terry, did you happen to make the last one?
No, we
didn't either. So
last time because
I didn't go, but she was there today.
Okay, did she give it?
And she gave him an update. What did she talk about? Judith Snow. Oh, the grants. She talked about the grants, that they're going through the grant process from the Elf Casino Night, and that they're also looking at the Judith Snow Award.
Yeah, I think that was about it. She did give some good information about the ELF grant application process, which those will be coming up due, and the great success of the casino night. So.
Okay, great. Traffic safety, I was at that one. Very fortunate, things have been going well. The issue was we had some areas in town where, believe it or not, snow had been removed on sidewalks, and there is no rule or anything in Park Ridge that says that you have to remove snow, not like the city. So tried to work through, we had one area over by Washington. I suggested to Scott that we go over there and look at that, and if we have to do something to manage the safety of our kids, we'll go send somebody over and clean the sidewalk. That's what we have to do. And so we took care of that, but things are moving along, pretty well. I was pretty happy with what the city's done in relationship to moving snow, because in the past we've had a lot of problems getting buses turned around corners. I've heard no complaints on that. I've heard no complaints from parents about where their kids stand to wait to get on the buses. First year, not heard a complaint about that. So somebody somewhere along the line is doing some things right, which is a good thing. But we had a good traffic safety meeting with no issues. So we did have something that occurred the other day that's not on here. Actually, the first time since I've been here is that we had an Amber Alert. And while the police department did a very nice job of that, there were a couple of breakdowns, I felt, with the school district, because things were happening very quickly, and information was not being fed to us from the police department like it normally is. And so we might have been a few minutes later getting our piece out there, but I would not post anything until I got some kind of official notice of what was going on. And I had to finally get to the police chief to get that, so we're working through that breakdown as far as why we didn't get an initial notification. It was amazing. As soon as we did that, we knew right away what had happened later on with the automobile and the child. We were the first ones to get notified of that, which was the way it should be, but we're a little behind the ball as far as getting us on board with that Amber Alert. So we're going to work that piece out. We're going to have that discussion actually in the morning at our safety and security meeting to make sure that piece is in place. Insurance meeting, Becky? That's right, it's this Thursday, that's right. So we're good, Tony.
Other items?
Question
just
is
one thing real quick. Tomorrow is the sustainability meeting at 4 o'clock. So anybody that can be there?
Okay, I could be there. I call it the Lorex meeting. I think it's a great thing. So you were going to go, but you can't make it?
Yes, I can't do
I think I can be there. Where is it?
It'll be downstairs
Okay.
in the old boardroom. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Look forward to that. Okay.
Other items?
Just the information that's listed there. There's another FOIA that came today from the Attorney General's office. We'll give you more details as that begins to unfold. That's the first time that I'm aware that we've ever gotten one of those, but we have, so we're going to deal with it. I tried to keep everybody abreast of what was happening at the AASA, which is the American Association of School Administrators, at our annual conference in Nashville, Tennessee. There were a number of speakers, but probably the one that came across the most profound was the president of the American Federation of Teachers, and Randy Weingarten. And if any of you have ever heard her speak before or know much about AFT, AFT is very out there, very aggressive, so to speak. When she actually was a substitute speaker for someone who could not get in from New York City because of the weather. But as she was speaking, the crowd, all of us started to warm to her because her message was very good. And the message was that public schools, public education in this country is really now in the defensive mode in defending what it is that we do. And she really urged boards and administration and superintendents all to work together as we move down this road to make sure that public schools continue to prosper, continue to stay alive and well. She did a very nice job of that, and she got a little applause at the end. So it was a great conference, and it was very good. So that's it.
One final comment here. If you direct your attention to the review of unpaid student fees, statistically, when I looked at this, the preponderance seems to be at Emerson and Lincoln, almost by 50% jumps. Now, I don't know if that's because Emerson and Lincoln have higher student fees, but has the administration heard any feedback or more levels of complaints, or why do you think that would be the case? Any idea?
Tony, I'm not sure I have an answer or response to that. We communicate to all people in all manners, and Emerson has a greater population, so.
Is there?
Or the middle schools have a greater population.
They have what?
The middle schools have a greater population then.
Well, yeah, okay. All righty. So any other questions or comments regarding other items? And if not, we need to go into closed session. We'll need to have a motion.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
And we're not to return.
And not to return into open session. And we are going in for reasons of 5 Illinois Compiled Statute 122C2, which is the salary schedules of one or more classes of employees. 5 Illinois Compiled Statutes 122C10, special education programs and other matters relating to individual students. We'll need to take a vote on this.
I would amend my motion for all that stuff, because then we technically have to do that. Would you second that?
I second all that.
All righty.
It sounds worse than it is.
Since we have a second, we need a vote. So Dan?
Yes.
Aye. Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Why don't we take 5 minutes?